Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Grueller. I am a criminal defense attorney, and today we're talking about KYLE Rittenhouse. Not guilty, baby. Yes, a day we've been waiting for, and been waiting a couple of extra long days. They've been feeling like they've been dragging on and on and on, but my friends, it was all worth it because KYLE Rittenhouse acquitted on all charges. And man, what a day it was. If you have missed it, we're going to get through a lot of it today. We're going to actually show you the moment from court today in Schrader's courtroom where KYLE Rittenhouse, one by one, was found not guilty. And man, it was a relief. I don't know about you, but my heart was pounding there, especially as we got to that last count. And so we're going to relive it because it's one of those that must be relived, and we're going to do it here. And then we're going to spend some time bouncing around the country and taking a look at reaction from everybody else. Specifically, the White House came out and they had a statement that we're going to read through. The ACLU is out there. A lot of people are upset about it. Jerry Nadler, the politician, not the diaper, was also out there on Twitter. He's very unhappy about this. And we had a very interesting press conference from Mark Richards, KYLE Rittenhouse's defense lawyer. And so we're going to go through all of that and more. It is a party. We're happy that you're here. And if you just take a moment, you just go, oh, you smell that? Take that deep breath of fresh air. Do you know what that scent is? Justice, sweet justice. And make sure you savor it extra thoroughly today, my friends, because it's a good one. We get a lot of that smell around here at this office, but today it's especially pungent. So soak up that sweet smell of freedom, and let's get into the news. If you want to be a part of the show, the place to do that is over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, where there is a form that looks like this. You can just take if you're a supporter over there, take your question, throw it in that form. We'll make sure that we get to those today. We also have a Clips channel. The Clips channel is at Robert Grueller ESQ Clips, where we actually segment out this entire live stream so that you can share those individually with friends or family, and we certainly appreciate it when you do. All right, my friends, and so if you missed it, you probably haven't, but we're going to watch it again. This is the moment, and today I was in meetings all morning, and there was a moment where in the middle of my meeting, we all just had to pause for 2 minutes and watch this clip, and hearts were just pounding away. This is what it looked like in court. Judge Schrader says, "We've got a verdict. Please rise. Jury, let us know what you found." Here it is.
The defendant will rise and face the jury and hearken to its verdicts.
State of Wisconsin versus KYLE Rittenhouse. As to the first count of the information, Joseph Rosenbaum. We, the jury, find the defendant, KYLE H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the second count of the information, Richard McGinnis. We, the jury, find the defendant, KYLE H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the third count of the information, unknown male. We, the jury, find the defendant, KYLE H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the fourth count of the information, Anthony Huber, we, the jury, find the defendant, KYLE H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the fifth count of the information, Gage Grosskreutz, we, the jury, find the defendant, KYLE H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
Members of the jury, are these your unanimous verdicts? Is there anyone who does not agree with the verdicts as read? Would you wish the jury polled? No. Okay. Okay, folks, your job is done, and we started just about 3 weeks ago. And I told you it could last 2 weeks and 2 days. This is 2 weeks. This is 3 weeks. You were a wonderful jury to work with. You were punctual. You were attentive. And the forgotten six over here who had a very difficult job of keeping from discussing the case during the time that they were sequestered as well. All of you,
Whoa, baby, man, that was a long time coming. And I don't know about you folks, but I get emotional watching that. I've watched it a few times already today, and I hit that again. And man, it's just that feeling because we have spent a lot of time and a lot of emotion fighting for this young man, wanting to make sure that he gets through this thing unscathed. It's felt like a David versus Goliath affair. And so much was at stake here, not just about us as viewers, as people who are watching this sort of, praying for justice in society. But I mean, KYLE Rittenhouse, a young man, 18 years old, who has the weight of the entire world on his shoulders, his defense team. I mean, you can just feel the emotion. It is just, I don't even know what to say. I mean, my emotions are really still on, in redlining. It's like amazing day. And this doesn't happen often. The reason it's so emotional is because this doesn't always go this way. I've seen it go the other way. And it feels like oftentimes as a defense attorney, we're fighting for people that we believe are in KYLE Rittenhouse's shoes. And we're fighting for them in the face of this Goliath that just has no mercy and has no empathy for humanity whatsoever. And it's just, a constant slog fighting for good people in the criminal justice system. So when you get to see a case like this that since day one was obviously self-defense, victorious, we get to see justice actually done, man. As a defense lawyer, man, it brings me joy, it brings a lot of light to my heart, and I'm just tremendously grateful that it went the way that it did, because there was a lot of uncertainty there, especially as the jury was, allowing this thing to continue to be deliberated for day after day after day. But the verdict came down the way that it did. KYLE Rittenhouse is acquitted, as he should have been. Case should have never been charged in the first place, in my humble opinion, but the right outcome is here. Now we have to sort of put some pieces back together, I think, in a lot of society, because there is a lot of questions that still need to be answered about this case. But before we indulge in all of that, let's make sure that we can poke around the rest of the courthouse and see what the reaction looked like from everyone else. Woo! All right, so mom had the same reaction. Andrew Haveranack says this was the moment that Wendy Rittenhouse heard from her son that he'd been acquitted of all charges. And so, man, you can feel that right there. You can feel that emotion. Here's a close-up, just a sigh of relief. Praise the Lord. Boy is coming home tonight. And my goodness, it is something that I could relate to. Now, it's also important to think about the other side of this equation. And I know that it's important to celebrate and stop and pause for a moment and say that there was an attempted injustice that was about to happen in this case that was rightfully usurped in the interest of justice. And even though this whole thing is a victory on the side of justice, it still emanates out of a tragic situation. And we have dead people. We have a young man, KYLE Rittenhouse, whose life has been seriously perturbed. And there is a lot of mourning that is still taking place from people on the other side of the aisle. And so I think it's important to just make a quick point of this, that we are talking about human beings. We have the family of Anthony Huber. They're there. He is obviously deceased. He's one of the people that KYLE Rittenhouse killed. Said the not guilty verdict sends the unacceptable message that armed civilians can show up in any town, incite violence, and then use the danger they have created to justify shooting people in the street. And so obviously shocked at the verdict. This was Rosenbaum's fiance we see over here. And I think this was Anthony Huber's girlfriend. And then this was Aunt Anthony Huber. And so a little bit of a close up there. They're all sort of shocked at the verdict. And now right after the verdict, judge is going to call and come out in here and thank the jury. Here's a clip of that.
Keeping from discussing the
Actually,
case
this
during
is
the time that
KYLE
they were
Rittenhouse, I
sequestered
think.
as well. All of you, I couldn't have asked for a better jury to work with.
There he is.
And it has truly been my pleasure. I think, without commenting on the verdicts themselves, just in terms of your the attentiveness and the cooperation that you gave to us, justifies the confidence that the founders of our country placed in you. So I dismiss you at this time. You're never under any obligation to discuss any aspect of this case with anyone. You're welcome to do so as little or as much as you want. The media have requested, a number of media sources have requested the ability to talk to you, and they have been allowed to present presentations to you that you'll get in writing, and it's entirely up to you whether you want to contact them.
You
they
can see
are not
Miss
to
Huber there.
contact you. If anyone does contact you, and just tell them you're not interested in discussing it, if that's the case. And if anyone persists in doing so, report that to us and it will be addressed, I assure you. At the beginning of the trial, there was some concern about information and your safety, and I assure you that we will take every measure to ensure that that is your concerns are addressed and respected. I'm going to talk to you for just a minute, not about anything to do with the case, but just about that sole issue. And you, as I say, you're welcome to discuss the case as little or as much as you want. Any questions, anybody? Thank you so much. And
all right, so then judge basically releases the jurors. They go back into the jury panel again. The judge is going to go have a quick conversation with them about who knows what, but that's basically it. Kyle gets a notice and he runs over, and I think he's probably going to get some paperwork. The clerk or somebody calls him, and he sort of runs over there.
For service again. It would be my pleasure to work with you. Thank you.
And then our final clip of the morning is the order of dismissal. So now this is very important, of course. We get the verdict, but you got to do something with the verdict. So you ask the judge to enter the order. This is the final request here from Mark Richards. The government does not oppose. You hear Binger back over there. He says something like, well, judge, the jury rendered their verdict, and this is justice, I guess. And so the judge enters it and says, good day. That's it. They stand. It looks like the jury is going to be leaving now. They shake hands. Job well done. Yeah, Corey Chirifisi looks like maybe he's got...
Richards? Any word from the state?
The jury has represented our community in this trial and has spoken.
All right, the motion of the defendant is granted. The charges against the defendant on all counts are dismissed with prejudice, and he is released from the obligation of his bond. Anything else?
Whoa.
Thank you. Good day.
And so Mark Richards asks that the final order be entered. Attorney Binger, Thomas Binger, says, any objections? He's, well, no, Your Honor. The jury has represented our community and they have spoken. So I guess I can't object anymore. Judge said, boom. All right, next case. Moves on to the next case. Nope, nothing even to say about it. All right, we're done here. Next case. So I took a look over at the Wisconsin court website, and they've already updated the minute entries. And so, folks, it is now internet official. It's on the court docket. So we've got November 19th minutes, day 15. Clerk is T. Lema, says same appearances. Jurors continue deliberation, period. Verdict has been reached, period. Extra jurors summoned into courtroom, 12:10, 12 jurors in, 12:11, verdicts read, defendant found not guilty on 5 counts. No request to poll the jury. Jurors excused at 12:17. Defense moves for judgment on the verdict. Motion granted. Case dismissed with prejudice. The issue of bond is going to be addressed at a later hearing because remember, Rittenhouse has a $2 million bond. That's a lot of money. Somebody's going to want that money. And then you see also verdicts on the 5 counts. Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. How sweet it is. Congratulations to Kyle Rittenhouse, to his defense team, to everybody involved in the case. Outstanding. Congratulations to America for being a part of a winning justice outcome. I mean, that doesn't happen often in this country. Woo! All right, but it's not a victory for everybody. We have the family of Anthony Huber, obviously unhappy about this. They came out with a press release and they said, "We are heartbroken and angry that Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted in his criminal trial for the murder of our son. There was no justice today for Anthony or for Mr. Rittenhouse's other victims, Joseph Rosenbaum, Gage Grosskreutz. We did not attend the trial because we could not bear to sit in a courtroom and repeatedly watch video of our son's murder, and we've been subjected to many hurtful and nasty comments throughout the year. But we watched the trial closely, hoping it would bring us closure. That did not happen. Today's verdict means there is no accountability for the person who they say murdered their son, not legally. It sends the unaccepted message that armed civilians can show up in any town, incite violence, and then use the danger they have created to justify the shooting." So obviously they're upset about this. "We hope that decent people will join us in forcefully rejecting the message. Make no mistake, our fight to hold those responsible continues in full force." So I'm curious if they're going to be moving with a civil type of lawsuit. "Neither Mr. Rittenhouse nor the Kenosha police who authorized this bloody rampage will escape justice. Anthony will have his day in court." Oh, all right. So there you go. So it sounds like they're going to be filing lawsuits probably against Rittenhouse. They're also going to file lawsuits probably against Kenosha PD because they authorized this bloody rampage. So the civilian lawsuits, of course, will continue on. And we know already that Mr. Grosskreutz has, I think his is already well underway for $10 million. So the Huber family will continue on with their civil claims. They finished out, they said, yeah, they're going to blame the police, saying the police did nothing, the police didn't stop them. Yeah, so they're going to want to go get their money out of the government. Calling him a hero, wanted to protect innocent civilians. Yeah. So probably going with that active shooter story as well. But our hearts go out to them. They're mourning the loss of their son and family member. So we'll have empathy for them also. Prayers for them. We also have to check in with Mark Richards. Mark Richards is the defense attorney who represented Kyle Rittenhouse victorious today. He gave a very lengthy press conference, about 25 minutes. I have some pretty good highlights from him. He actually gave us some good details. He talked about why Kyle Rittenhouse testified, talked about his opinion on Thomas Binger, talked about his opinion on Judge Schrader and about the Tumblr and a bunch of stuff. So we're going to go through it. Here is how it started, at least when I picked up on it. PBS NewsHour, I think, picked it up sort of midway through it. But first, most obvious question, how is Kyle Rittenhouse doing? He just went through a 2.5-week trial. He had a life in prison sentence hanging over his head. He is somebody who presumably still has PTSD as a result of being involved in multiple shootings and actual homicides. So how's he doing? Mark Richards tells us. Here's what he says.
He has a huge sense of relief for what the jury did to him today. He wishes none of this would have ever happened. But as he said when he testified, he did not start this. And we're thankful in more ways than one that the jury finally got to hear the true story. And when I say the media, I'm talking about social media and things like that. The story that came out from the beginning was not the true story, and that was something that we had to work to overcome in court, and we think we did that.
All right. Huge sense of relief, obviously. You and me both. You and the rest of America there, Mark. So congratulations to him. Now, one of the most obvious questions was some concerns about the jury. You know, they were out for a long time, Mark. Did you ever have any doubt that they were going to come back guilty? Were you nervous there, Mark? Here's what he said. No doubt, but it was a long time.
Feeling a little bit of worry.
No doubt. I never predict how long a jury's going to be out, but it was the longest jury deliberation I've ever been a part of. I had an 18-hour and a 17-hour. One was a federal and one was a state case. It was torture. And this might sound like a small thing, but the judge wanted us to be within 10 minutes. Obviously, my office isn't within 10 minutes, so we had to sit in that room on the 3rd floor, and it was hell.
What did you talk about the decision to put Kyle on the stand? Was that a close call for you? Do you think that made a difference in the case?
You want the truth?
Yes.
Had to put him on. It wasn't a close call. At certain points, we wondered whether we would put him on. We did. We had a mock jury, and we did 2 different juries, one with him testifying, one without him testifying. It was substantially better when he testified, I mean, to a marked degree, and that sealed it. But in Wisconsin, if you don't put a client on the stand, you're going to lose, period.
Very interesting. So if you heard that, 2 little clips there. One that, the jury was out for a long time, and he's surprised because it was the longest time that he's had a juror out in his entire career. And it was a long time. It was, many people started to suspect that by the time that we got to day 4, which is where we're at, that it was just going to be presumed to be a hung jury. It was going to be a deadlock. But of course that didn't happen. So Mark Richards said no doubt, but I'm not sure I believe that. We saw his head buried in his hands when the verdict was being read. We saw Corey Chirafisi fidgeting in his seat, and Kyle Rittenhouse obviously you could see the emotions on all 3 of their faces, rightfully so. But he said no doubts about it, and we knew it was going to happen, which is good. I like a little bit of bravado, of course. But then he gets asked that very important question, and one in which I had a strong disagreement with from the very beginning. He got asked specifically, what were your thoughts about putting Kyle Rittenhouse on the stand? Was that a good call? Would you have done that again? Why'd you do that? And he said specifically, I had to put Kyle Rittenhouse on the stand. In Wisconsin, if you don't put him on the stand, you lose. And so that's, that's why you work with people in certain jurisdictions that know how the jurisdictions work. I'm an Arizona lawyer, I don't even know if I've been to Wisconsin. So, I don't know how jurors are there, how judges are there. This guy used to be a prosecutor and is also somebody who's done cases in front of Judge Schrader before, knows Kenosha very well. And so he knows he's got a better bearing and better understanding on how the juries and how the dynamics of that area work. He also talked about sort of these 2 juries. So he's talking about kind of focus group juries, which is great that they did this. And this is something I was telling you about when I was back in Arlington. I've just passed over this summer. I was in there and we did a whole session on using focus groups in order to test the different elements of your case. And, when we went through this focus group process, I sort of understand that, it can be useful. I've never personally used a focus group, but they did it in this case, it sounds like. So what they did is they had 2 separate juries, and they would try to communicate both, the same story, but change one variable in both presentations. So you tell the exact same story. You have Kyle Rittenhouse testify in one jury, and then you have Kyle Rittenhouse testify or not testify in front of another jury. And you see you're testing whether they like that variable well or not. And it sounds like what Mark Richards says as well. We tested it with Kyle, and they liked it better when it was with Kyle. And so that's why we went with Kyle. And it's like, yes, I understand that, but a focus jury, a focus group, they're always going to want more information. They're always going to want to see more than you're willing to give them. And so, regardless, look, there's no reason to go backwards on this thing. They won. He did it the way they did it. They put Kyle Rittenhouse on the stand. He knows how Wisconsin works. Wisconsin, they want to hear from the defendant. I wouldn't have known that. And I think a lot of the other lawyers who are commenting on this stuff, unless you practice in that particular area, you wouldn't have known that either. And so that golden rule, if you don't put a defendant on the witness stand, kind of goes away if you happen to be practicing in Kenosha. And so Mark Richards knows that, and he made the decision, and he won. So, for people who are sort of commenting, it's always important, myself, I'm actually speaking about only myself, is that we recognize the limitations of our commentary. That, I have a presumption on how things work, generally speaking, in broad strokes, but apparently in Kenosha, if you're Mark Richards and you're in Judge Schrader's court, you put the defendant on the stand. Wouldn't have known that. So now we have another clip from Mark Richards. Says, is there anything that contributed to your win? What was the biggest win? What would you attribute this tremendous success to, Mark? Here's what he says.
There were a lot. I mean, I think it's at the beginning, but when Attorney Binger gave his opening statement and said those things that Kyle chased Rosenbaum down, I don't know where that came from to this day. It was ridiculous. And that gave me something to really show and argue to a jury that this isn't fair. It's not a game. And I think that was huge. Corey, you know, my co-counsel, and I stress the word co-counsel, he was not a second chair, was incredible. We fought over who got to cross-examine Gage Grosskowitz. He won, and he did a better job than I would have.
This case has got incredible.
All right, so Corey Chirafisi, co-counsel, not a second chair. We were equals on this bad boy, and he was great, and he was great. He did a good job cross-examining Gage Grosskowitz, and I think it was probably the right call. Mark Richards is a little bit more, you know, kind of down-to-earth, folksy, and I think you want him to deliver the more heartfelt portions of the trial, which he did. He specifically did with opening statements and closing arguments, and then he gave some of the more slice and dice portions of the case, somebody where you need somebody who's cold and calculating to just go in there and just sort of dice them with words quickly. Oh, so it's true. And isn't it also, and you also did, okay, and that's what Chirafisi was great at. Just kind of pulled out his sword, went out there and did a little slice and dice, and then turned the more emotional stuff back over to Mark Richards. So says a lot happened. Also, Binger's kind of a dummy. He said that Rittenhouse was chasing Rosenbaum, and that obviously was not the case. And so as soon as he said that, it gave Mark Richards a lot to just latch into, and he certainly did that. So, we get sort of the opposite of that question. If there was some really good things that happened here, what were some bad things that happened? And he sort of references Rittenhouse's prior counsel. Of course, I've been highly critical of them because they have been proven to be terrible lawyers. And Mark Richards here is not even going to call them by their first names. Here's what he says.
You know, when I took this case, I was hired by the two first lawyers. I'm not going to use their names. They wanted to use Kyle for a cause and something that I think was inappropriate. And I don't represent causes. I represent clients. And the only thing that ended up mattering to me was whether he was found not guilty or not.
Is that what Kyle feels as well? Is that what Kyle wants, or does he?
I believe that's what he wanted. And I had, you know, I told him when I first met him, when he was in custody, that if he was looking for somebody to go off on a crusade, I wasn't his lawyer.
Yeah, look at that face. And that's exactly right. That's exactly right. That was my biggest criticism with Pierce and Lynn and all these other guys. You know, everything was about fundraising and about, you know, fighting back and all this media stuff. And I'm going, hey, yeah, but you got a 17-year-old kid right here, though, who's like pretty high priority. And I had a lot of issues with how they handled it from the very get-go, because remember, he went back from Wisconsin over to Illinois, and then there was all these extradition hearings that took place there, and they were really fighting to keep him in Illinois. And I said, why? They have harsher bond conditions. He can't get out of custody in Illinois. Send him back to Wisconsin where he can get out on bail. And there's precedent for that. And as soon as they stopped fighting extradition, he went back over to Wisconsin. Guess what happens? Posted bail, and he's out of custody. So I don't know why his, you know, first lawyers couldn't figure that out. But it's probably because they're not good criminal defense lawyers, and they were not thinking about his best interest. They were thinking about their crusade and generating a bunch of funds. And so, I mean, I love what I heard from Mark Richards. He's exactly right. It's about, you know, you got an ethical duty to the person that you're representing, not to your fundraising account. So I'm glad that got corrected early on in the case. We also have an interesting question. Many of us here on this channel were sort of playing games with the deliberation timeline. Is it going to be over 3 hours or under 3 hours? Is it going to be 1 day or 4 days? And people are speculating and playing that guessing game. And we were not alone. Also, Mark Richards was also doing it with his wives and friends and family members. And you're just going, oh, talk about anxiety. Here it is.
I mean, I expected, we kind of picked amongst ourselves, our wives, our friends, my associates in the building. And I had Tuesday at 4:30, so I was way wrong.
Tuesday at 4:30.
Nobody had it going past Thursday. And, you know, there was talk today about whether they were going to deliberate on Saturday. I've never seen a jury, and I don't mean this as a slight to them, but they didn't have a lot of questions. We had no information that they ever fought. They were just working through the issues. And, you know, so it was the time that made me nervous. There wasn't any information coming out.
They submitted 5 questions over that.
Yeah, so he's basically saying that they had the same frustrations that a lot of us had. You know, there wasn't a lot of questions coming out. It was only those 5 questions, and the first 2 of those were that they wanted all of the jury instructions. They wanted pages 1 through 6 first, and then 7 through 36 second. And then one juror yesterday wanted to take the instructions home, and we're going, what are they doing? We read through all the jury instructions yesterday, 36 pages of them. We talked about provocation and the self-defense and the duty to retreat and how complicated they are. And turns out that they were just making sure they were doing their due diligence. You know, they went through it with a fine-tooth comb. They came out and they reached the verdict that they did. And Mark Richards, even from within the courtroom, was experiencing a lot of the same informational blackout that the rest of us were. Didn't know what they were doing. Had no indication that they were fighting or anything like that. It's just kind of a dead zone, kind of like silence. So they reached the verdict that they did, and that, of course, is good news. Mark Richards and the defense team also very concerned about many of the same things we were discussing here, concerned that maybe the jurors would try to reach a compromise, try to do a split verdict where they might, you know, try to reach an agreement or negotiate on the criminal charges. And now, since we had a whole slew of lesser included charges, it could have been one of those. Yeah, maybe it's not the intentional homicide, but maybe it's the reckless, negligent, whatever. And because there was 36 pages of documents in the jury instructions, along with a whole slew of lesser includeds, many people are speculating that they're trying to split this down the middle. Say, well, maybe we'll do it on count 5, but not on counts 2, and that makes you certainly nervous because you don't want that to happen. You want the self-defense principle, the concept that protects and privileges all the conduct to privilege Kyle exclusively for every charge. And if you pop that and you start to compromise, then you start to have the risk that the domino continues and he gets convicted on all charges. So here is Mark Richards discussing that concern after the verdict today.
Concerning or puzzling question, for you?
Hey, I was afraid of a compromise. I know it's been reported that we asked for lesser includeds. We objected to all lesser includeds. Kyle was questioned on lesser includeds because he has to be, but that wasn't our wish. That wasn't Kyle's wish. And we, as time went on, were afraid that there would be some horse trading in the jury room. And that's what really concerned us.
Yeah, horse trading. Sometimes stuff like this will happen even in DUI cases. And it's really weird in DUI cases because sometimes the way the DUI charging will work is you'll have multiple different charges that kind of stack on top of one another. So you'll have impaired to the slightest degree, which means if you're impaired to any degree at all, that you can be convicted of a DUI. Then you have the legal limit, which we're all familiar with. And then you'll typically have some sort of extreme DUI or a super extreme sort of, more serious DUIs based on the amount of blood alcohol content that's in your body. And sometimes juries will do weird things. Like they'll split it where they'll actually convict somebody on a higher level charge. So they'll say, well, we found that you were over the legal limit, but we're not going to convict you on the impaired to the slightest degree charge. And you're sort of going, well, if you're going to convict me of that higher level one, that sort of includes the lower level. So how do you do that? Or they'll convict somebody on a super extreme DUI, but not a lower level DUI. And you go, well, you kind of have to, but they don't, right? And oftentimes what that means, what that leads people to believe is that they're trying to compromise. They're trying to say, well, we'll get them on that one, but not on this one. And so they're trading horses because they just want to go home. And so, that starts to make you very nervous as a defense lawyer because it's not like a poker game or a negotiation over a business deal. Give me 25 widgets. I'll give you $100. 100? It's 200 there, buddy. You know what my widgets cost, and you're not negotiating over this. We're not trying to say we're going to give Kyle 1 life sentence instead of 2. It's a human being. It's a human life, and so we don't want people, especially jurors, to get sort of loose with the outcomes on this stuff. Trading counts 2 and 3 for counts 4 and 5 and that type of stuff. So fortunately, we didn't have that happen, but of course it is a concern, and Mark Richards was right to call it out. He also talks about the drone video. So a lot of us had a lot of questions about this. This was the magical drone evidence fairy video that was dropped on the prosecution's desk that happened to be improperly disclosed to the defense, happened to be about 3 times the resolution or the ability to see, at least the file size, was almost 3 times bigger than the actual video file that was disclosed to the defense. And so Mark Richards is asked about that. You know, the judge was listening to your motion to dismiss with prejudice, to dismiss without prejudice, and there was a lot of conversation about this. You got up, I mean, the judge got up off the bench and went down and looked at the big screen. You brought a big screen in here. What are your thoughts on the drone footage? Here's Mark Richards.
I'm thankful we're never going to have to litigate the issue regarding the drone video, but they kept saying we stipulated to it, we let it in. We agreed to let it in because we saw the quality we were given and the jury couldn't see anything. And then they're saying, well, his first lawyer had it because it was on Tucker Carlson. John Pierce never had that video. We've talked to Fox News. We've talked to Tucker Carlson's show. The video that was on Tucker Carlson's show started right when Rosenbaum threw the bag. It did not start with the part that they showed at the beginning. It's a huge difference. That's what they built their whole case on, with that garbage photo. And, you know, maybe you don't expect everything in a trial, ever. And that program that they used and the expert from the crime lab specifically says on the company's blog, artificial intelligence enhancements are not to be used for forensic evidence. And they did it. And our research after it, it would have been the subject of a huge motion. We don't have to do it.
You see how shady that is? Oh my gosh. So he says specifically that, well, you know, they cropped it, they manipulated it. The video on Tucker Carlson started after the fact. So it's all, you know, hogwash anyways. The sourcing of the video is problematic. But then he says the method of disclosure and the defense's stipulation to this was so underhanded, it'll make your skin crawl. So he says specifically that the reason they stipulated to the video, which means the government came to them and they said, listen, we've got all these videos. We have this one, Exhibit 37, and you, Thomas Binger, and I'm Thomas Binger, and blah, blah, blah. And he's got all of these different exhibits. And they look at them and they say, okay, we got all these here. We just stipulate, we agree that go ahead and get them submitted. And this was the point that I made at the start of the trial. I was like, why would they be admitting all of these exhibits without fighting over them? And it's because they looked at them. And I even made the point, it's like, who cares? Take the jurors and rub their faces in every one of these videos if it shows self-defense. I mean, if it shows your client is actually innocent and it hasn't been adjusted, it's like, who cares? Show all of them, all of the videos. And I thought that the defense was very strong and you know, convinced that there was nothing that they were going to see that was going to be problematic for their case. So what? Take 25 videos. Nobody cares. They looked at them. They determined that they weren't a threat to their case. They got them admitted. Same thing happens here. So now we get this new footage. The prosecution knows, because of prior practice with the defense, that all they have to do is just show them some copy of it. You want to look at it? Yeah, we looked at it. Yeah, again, nothing here. It's like the other 35 videos you gave us. It's another garbage video. And so they just say, oh, they're just going to stipulate to it, just like the others. Okay, judge, we're stipulating to this other video. But guess what? They don't turn that video in. That's the video that the defense got, but the other video that's actually going to be submitted to the jury actually does show something differently, because you can see it more clearly, right? The resolution's higher. I know every time I use the technical terms, somebody disagrees with them, but you can see more. It is not as granular. You can actually zoom in and you can see more of the pixels. And so now the defense, they would have never agreed, they would have never stipulated to getting that video in the first place, because now you'd make the argument that it's a freeze frame, it's showing something, it's a narrative that the prosecution is proffering that's not based in evidence, and so you'd fight like hell to keep that out, and they didn't do that because they didn't know that there was the old switcheroo that happened until the close of evidence. Shady AF. And Mark Richards knows that. Now, they're just saying, oh, this is just a little bit of a confusion. The file got renamed and I emailed it and I airdropped it, and I'm not a technical wizard, and I don't even get paid enough to know what file conversion stuff is, even though I've got Handbrake and Format Factory on my desktop. Oh, I'm so happy and so glad that he got acquitted. But folks, this is gross behavior coming out of Kenosha, Wisconsin, out of that DA's office. All right, we have some more conversation here from Mark Richards talking about Kyle's testimony and says, yeah, you know what? He's probably got a lot of remorse. It shows out a little bit differently. PTSD, counseling. I know Kyle Rittenhouse. I know how he feels. Here's Mark Richards today.
I think he does. We've talked about it. There's been so much talk about whether the tears were genuine. All I can say is when we prepared Kyle and we worked on his testimony, there were things we couldn't talk about in my office because it got too emotional and he couldn't handle it. He's in, counseling for PTSD, so he doesn't sleep at night. Remorse, I think, manifests itself some other ways. I don't think he can ever walk out here and say that because of the situation. But I know Kyle Rittenhouse, and I know what he feels.
Yeah, so he's obviously a wreck. 18 years old to go through that. 2 people are dead, another person injured. You live a year and almost, several months with the weight of a potential life sentence over your shoulders. I mean, folks, you can't even imagine the pressure that was on that young man. PTSD and this entire experience is traumatic in and of itself. Standing there, waiting for the bailiff to read your life sentence, your entire future in those 2 seconds. Nope, you don't know what that does to a person's mind. I mean, I don't know what it is. I've stood there next to people who have been sentenced, and I felt what sliver of energy that they have given off, but it is not the same thing. And what Kyle went through, I fully suspect that he's going to have PTSD from this trial and the media exposure, and a lot of work to do in order to overcome that and piece together all the damage that has been done. So, oh man, emotional. Okay, what's next for Kyle? Somebody asks him. Here's what Mark Richards says.
He has to get on with his life the best he can. I think eventually some anonymity will come back to it. I don't think he'll continue to live in this area. I think it's too dangerous. He's had 24-hour security since this happened. We're thankful that the judge protected his address. Everybody in this case, and when I say that, I mean prosecution, defense. To me, it's scary how many death threats we've had. I was answering my phone on the way back from court in Kenosha. My office isn't that far. After the 3rd death threat, I quit answering the phone.
24-hour security, stopped answering the phone after the 3rd death threat. Yesterday on the show, we read a lot of Judge Schrader's death threats. So, I mean, it's, highly volatile situation. And so what's Kyle going to do? Probably have to get out of there, and rightfully so. It is it's too much. There's no reason to stick around, I don't think. And so we now go back to talking about some of the specifics. Now that Kyle is acquitted on all of the charges, what do we do about that bond? Remember, there's a $2 million bond that was ultimately paid for. Kyle is acquitted, so that bond was put up to secure his appearance. It was saying, look, we're going to hold on to these $2 million, and we're going to let Kyle go in exchange for that $2 million. If Kyle doesn't show up for court, that's our $2 million. And we're going to use that to go get Kyle. And so that's sort of the security to make sure that he shows up to court. Well, now he's been acquitted. He doesn't have any more court dates. There's no reason for him to ever have contact regarding this case again. He's been found not guilty of all the charges. So now that bond is not necessary to secure any appearance. And so that's got to go back to somebody. And it's $2 million. That's a lot of money. And Kyle Rittenhouse was somebody who was a lightning rod for fundraising in this country. A lot of people raised a lot of money. Who's going to get that money back? Mark Richards doesn't know too much about that. Here's what he said.
What happens to the $2 million bond?
I suspect there will be a fight over that. John Pierce is the person who posted the bond. All of that money was raised on behalf of Kyle. Lynn Wood and Fight Back say that they're entitled to it. There was, and when I'm using round numbers, but there was half $1 million, I think, that came directly from Wendy Rittenhouse from money she had raised. So there's going to be a fight over that, and I'm just thankful that there will be a fight over that, because if he had lost, it wouldn't have mattered.
You know, Kyle had aspirations to be a first responder. That's still
He wants to be a nurse.
still wants to be a nurse.
What would you say your biggest
Yeah, so Kyle's going to go and be a nurse. And, John Pierce and Lynn Wood and whoever else is involved in any of any of that fundraising, $2 million that they're going to have to duke it out over. It sounds like even Wendy Rittenhouse put up $500,000. So it sounds like what he's talking about is that a lot of this money all got sort of put into a big pot and got kind of commingled a little bit, and then it was put up. And so nobody really knows who is there's $2 million out there that is now exonerated. So that money is now, the judge is going to order that to be released. Where does that go? A lot of people are going to want a piece of that. Now, Thomas Binger, Little Binger, I think is the hashtag on Twitter. He was the focal point of the prosecution throughout this entire trial. We have Mark Richards, who gets asked about him because Mark Richards has been practicing law for a long time. We know Thomas Binger has been also practicing law for a long time. Have these two crossed paths before? Yes, in fact, they have. Here is what Mark Richards has to say about Thomas Binger today.
I've known Tom Binger for a long time. I knew him when he was a civil lawyer. I'm disappointed with some of the things he did, and I've said why.
such as what?
Putting on the Kandiri brothers when you know they're lying, changing your prosecution, going with provocation after you say that my client chased him down and shot him in the back, calling him an active shooter when he's not. Justice is done when the truth is reached, and I don't know that it's set up to do that, but a prosecutor is supposed to seek the truth. It's not about winning, and this case became about winning, and that's probably why it got so personal.
How about the judge? What do you say about how the judge?
Yeah, so he asked him specifically about Binger, and he says, I'm pretty disappointed in Binger. There's a lot that he did that was inappropriate. He put people on the stand that were liars, and he knew that they were lying. And he also changed the strategy of his case sort of at the last minute, which was interesting because, you're not sort of obligated to share your strategy with the opposing side. In Arizona, for example, there are some courts where you can be a lot more cordial and candid with prosecutors because they're smaller courts, smaller jurisdictions. In fact, some courts just have one prosecutor, and that's all you've got, right? You just know who it is, and you're on first name basis with them. And you have others where it's really fungible, like prosecutors can change dynamically because of how their offices are structured. And so sometimes they'll just pick up a case in the morning. A DUI is a DUI is a DUI. It doesn't matter. They don't care. And so now you have sort of trial strategies that maybe aren't even discussed with opposing counsel. But in this case, it sounds like, this is a very long case and they've been working on it for a long time. He's known Thomas Binger since he was a civil lawyer, however long ago that was. And so they're talking through these issues, and it sounds like Mark Richards and Thomas Binger had more of a cordial relationship. They're talking about these things, and they're saying, listen, here's my strategy. Kyle Rittenhouse, self-defense. What do you think? No, I don't think so. I think Kyle Rittenhouse was the aggressor, and he chased Rosenbaum and shot Rosenbaum in the back. That's why we're charging this. They say, okay, well, if that's your interpretation, I guess my interpretation's this. Can I try to rebut your interpretation? Let me go out and get facts to rebut that belief that you have, Mr. Prosecutor. Maybe we can negotiate through this and then reach a plea deal or a dismissal of the charges if I can convince you to come around on my side. You see how that works? How that's a little bit more of we're both working together towards justice. A prosecutor says, listen, here's my objective take on the case. This is what I think happened. And the defense says, here's my take on the case. Here's what I think happened. And you both sort of go, well, okay, I can see your perspective on that, but let me clarify for you. And let's work through this to see if we can maybe come to an agreement that doesn't result in lives being wrecked. And you say, okay, cool, we're going to work together on that. And if you can't come to an agreement, then you say, all right, well, listen, we're going to let the jurors decide about this. I think I've got a stronger case. You think you've got a stronger case. We're going to let the jury decide. But you present your evidence based on the same premises that you've already discussed during the pretrial processes, during those proceedings. And you just say, look, we can't, we're loggerheads here. We can't agree on the interpretation of these facts. So we're going to let the jurors decide. But you kind of play a fair game. You kind of, you take your strategy and you execute the play because you kind of had conversations about it, and you know that there's certain things that you can and you cannot talk about, like the CVS video, right? You can't talk about that. You both are going to play ball. You're going to put up honest witnesses that tell the truth. You're going to play fair. You're going to both disclose evidence to each other. If Rittenhouse has videos, they're going to give you the real copies. If government has videos, they're going to give you the full copies, and vice versa. And everybody's going to play fair. But Thomas Binger didn't play fair, did he? And that's why Mark Richards is disappointed with him. He changed his strategy at the last minute. You're okay to do that. You can do that. But if Mark Richards had known that those were the rules, maybe he wouldn't have been such a nice guy with a lot of the other stipulations. If Mark Richards knew that Binger was going to try to sneak in that CVS evidence under the nose of the judge in the middle of a line of direct of cross-examination, maybe Mark Richards wouldn't have been such a nice guy. But Mark Richards was under the presumption that Thomas Binger was acting as Thomas Binger had acted according to their standard of relations, because they've known each other for a long time. And then Thomas Binger became a prosecutor and wanted to go and win and get the conviction at all costs, not fight for justice, but fight for a conviction. And that's what Mark Richards is so disgusted about. And he's not using that word, I'm using it, but it is disgusting behavior. If you're going to be, playing above board, then play above board. If you want to play aggressively and hide in the shadows and play in the dark, that's fine. Hide in the shadows and play in the dark. But don't tell us that we're playing above board and we're going to be candid, open, and transparent with one another and then do underhanded stuff. That's a no-no. That's inappropriate. It's like, taking steroids in a sports game. Yeah, you're using the same bat and the same moves, but you've got an unfair advantage. You're not playing according to the same standards that we are. And that's what Mark Richards was upset about. We have another clip from him sort of laughing at some of the much ado about nothing that we've seen a lot of in this trial, talking about the Asian food comment, talking about the tumbler, and a lot of the minutia that the media tried to latch onto in order to make this into something that it isn't. Here's what he said.
I've never seen so much made of so little. And that's not to pick on you guys or anything like that, but I've tried cases as a prosecutor 100 years ago in front of Judge Schrader. I've tried cases as a defense lawyer, and him and I butted heads as a defense lawyer. Judge Schrader gives you a fair trial as a defendant. You don't want him to sentence your client. Okay, but in this case, we were looking for a fair trial, and if we lost, we knew what was going to happen. So it wouldn't have mattered whether it was that judge or some other judge. He's getting life in prison. So I'd rather have a fair trial. I thought he gave us a fair trial.
Basically saying, much love to the judge. We know that he's going to give us a fair trial, but we know if he's convicted, it's basically life in prison. So there's not much to consider in terms of selecting judges for sentencing. Sometimes defense lawyers will want to pick certain judges for certain trials in certain cases. I don't know how things work in Wisconsin, but in Arizona, both sides have notices to change judges. So if you get in front of a judge that you really don't, have an issue with, you can file what's called a notice for a change of judge and get a different judge. And so, picking the right forum, the right judge, the right court, using some of those rules to your advantage is part of the conversation. And of course, that was part of the conversation here. I know Judge Schrader, been in front of him a lot of the time, done trials in front of him before. Fair judge. We know if he's going to sentence, it's not going to be good, but at least for the trial portion of it, he's going to run a fair show. And, largely the judge, even though I disagreed stylistically with a lot of how he ran the courtroom, I'd say that he made, when he made bad decisions, they were equally bad for both sides. When he made good decisions, they were equally good for both sides. There was a lot of decisions he made that went against Kyle Rittenhouse that I thought were very bad decisions, but he also made some decisions that I thought were a little strange for the prosecution. Not that I can think of any right now, but okay. So we have another conversation about the tumbler, which was a subject of a lot of attention during the time that it was used.
Everybody got all crazy about the tumbler. Who cares? That has to do with this. I mean, I've seen the tumbler used before. I've seen clerks pull things out and suspicious things happen. Kyle pulled it out. And I'll be real honest. We had every juror scored on a sheet, and we were devastated when those 3 of the 6 jurors were separated from the panel, because we thought they were 3 of our strongest jurors, and Kyle pulled their names. So I think it's a good system. You know, I've got a trial in front of him, you know, a big case, and maybe in that one I'll think he's unfair, but he's a fair judge.
Yeah, he's a fair judge, he says. I've been in front of him a number of times, and that's what you'd expect from a lawyer who's been practicing for a long time. Says that the tumbler is no problem at all, and don't see why it's such a big deal. So that was Mark Richards during the press conference. Thought we learned a lot about how he thinks about this case and how he was processing a lot of the information. We learned that Kyle is obviously very relieved, and he ends that press conference by saying, "Can I go home now?" And he just sort of walks off into the sunset. So congratulations once again to Mark Richards, the entire defense team. They need a long, long weekend, and hopefully they're going to be taking it and resting up. Same goes to Kyle and his family and everybody else involved. So final congratulations to the Rittenhouse team. The White House is reacting to the Rittenhouse verdict. They posted on Twitter, President Biden says, while the verdict in Kenosha will leave many Americans feeling angry and concerned, myself included, we must acknowledge that the jury has spoken. My full statement. Well, I'm sorry you feel that way, Joe. I'll tell you this, myself and many Americans feel pretty damn happy about it, pretty elated, pretty much enjoying that sweet smell of justice that's permeating the air today. It's very pungent. We love it. And so, yeah, you might have a lot of concerns. We had a lot of concerns about this, still do have a lot of concerns. Even though Kyle Rittenhouse has been acquitted, doesn't mean that there aren't issues at stake here, like why this case was even prosecuted in the first place, and whether or not there's going to be any repercussions to anybody who is involved in bringing the charges. And so let's see what President Biden had to say about it, because we're also going to check in. He had some other statements for us that came when he was running for office back during the election. So November 19th, the White House posted this, says, while the verdict in Kenosha will leave many Americans feeling angry and concerned, myself included, we must acknowledge the jury has spoken. I ran on a promise to bring Americans together, because I believe that what unites us is far greater than what divides us. I know that we're not going to heal our country's wounds overnight, but I remain steadfast in my commitment to do everything in my power to ensure that every American is treated equally with fairness and dignity under the law. So these statements, what the hell did he just say there? There's nothing in there. I urge everyone to express their views peacefully, okay, consistent with the rules of law. Violence and destruction of property have no place in our democracy unless you're, I guess, on the streets of Kenosha in 2020, then you're kind of a hero, according to Binger. The White House and the federal authorities have been in contact with Governor Evers' office to prepare for any outcome in the case. I've spoken with the governor this afternoon, offered support and any assistance. So President Joe Biden, he's upset about it, which is, it's good that he's still with us, because we had President Kamala Harris today for about 10 minutes. Scary thought to think about that. We were almost what if Kyle Rittenhouse had not been acquitted and we had President Kamala Harris all on the same day? Would have been a rough Friday, but that didn't happen. So we're back. We got President Biden, who's back in charge. Mayor Bill de Blasio can't let a statement go. He said that Anthony Huber and Joseph Rosenbaum are victims. Says they should be alive today. The only reason they're not is because a violent, dangerous man chose to take a gun across state lines and start shooting people. He says to call this a miscarriage of justice is an understatement. This guy is the dumbest person in America. Oh, my goodness. So he says that Kyle Rittenhouse is just a violent, dangerous man. He just went across state lines and he just started shooting people. Mayor Bill de Blasio. What a joke. All right, so fortunately, he's not going to be around much longer. And then, as we mentioned, we've got Representative Jerry Nadler, congressman, he's also here today, says this is a heartbreaking verdict. It's a miscarriage of justice and sets a dangerous precedent which justifies federal review by the DOJ. Can you believe this, big guy? He wants to refer this over to the federal Justice Department. Justice, he says, cannot tolerate armed persons crossing state lines looking for trouble while people engage in First Amendment protected protest. Jerry Nadler wants to refer this over to the DOJ. And people were speculating about this. Well, what can they get him on? And of course, there it is. It's crossing state lines. It's weapons charges across state lines. Federal jurisdiction. You have a sitting congressperson who is so triggered by this verdict that he's now wanting to bring in the feds. We'll see where that goes. J.D. Vance was out first with the statement. He's a candidate running in Ohio. Says even though Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted, he was long ago convicted in the court of public opinion. Not only was the trial a total embarrassment, but it also showed our entire criminal justice system is nothing more than a big joke. For the last year, a teenage boy was slandered and attacked by a biased conglomerate of progressive advocates claiming to be journalists. Jury was harassed by MSNBC. Kyle faced a corrupt prosecutor who attacked the law-abiding citizens while excusing the actions of looters, rioters, and thieves, went so far as to call them heroes. The deceit and dishonesty that we saw in this case, it made a total mockery of our First Amendment, which does not give a license for the powerful to harass politically inconvenient children. This was not impartial justice in a constitutional society. It was mob rule in a banana republic. Not a bad statement there from J.D. Vance. Now, the DCC came out. The Democratic Congressional Committee. What is the DCC? Democratic Congressional Caucus something or other. It's the big one. DCC. What is this? Anyway, their chairman came out, and it's Representative Sean Patrick Maloney issued the following statement about the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. Says, quote, "It's disgusting and disturbing that someone was able to carry a loaded assault rifle into a protest against the unjust shooting of Jacob Blake, a black man, and take the lives of two people and injure another and face absolutely no consequences." Well, he's faced some pretty severe consequences. It's the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. That's what it is. Thank you. Shout out to Joel Rowley. It is clear that our legal system has one set of rules for some Americans and very different standards for others. Okay, people are right to be outraged. They're right to be outraged at the violence that disproportionately hurts people of color. There were no people of color shot in this case. What is he talking about? And a legal system that fails to hold the violent accountable. We must continue to fight to end the violence against black Americans and stand for issues that affirm their humanity while we work to engage in the hearts and minds of Americans. And we need to achieve justice for all. There were no black people shot in this case. Right? Did I miss that? Okay, so the ACLU is also here, and they wrote a big, long, screeding tirade, as they typically do. They say Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty of the fatal shooting. The situation represents an outrageous failure to protect protesters by the Kenosha PD and the Kenosha County Sheriff's Office. They're going to be filing a lawsuit against them. That's why they're saying this. If they have not already, maybe they have. Says months of research and open records requests have uncovered many incidents in which police encouraged white militia members to become armed vigilantes in the street due to their failure to control the crowd. ACLU is stepping in the game, folks. People are breaking into sides now. ACLU versus the police. I mean, the police, they're saying, are encouraging white militia members to take control. ACLU says despite Kyle Rittenhouse's conscious decision to travel across state lines and to injure one person and take the lives of two, he was not held responsible. Unfortunately, they say this is not surprising. His acquittal comes after our investigation exposed how Kenosha law enforcement used violence against protesters and drove them towards white militia groups in a way that escalated tensions. It is far too easy to overlook the impact that violence in defense of white supremacy has on the black and brown communities. The ACLU says that I guess police are defending white supremacy now. Violence in the defense of white supremacy. Wild times. When the community rose up to exercise their First Amendment right to protest after the police shot a black man in front of his children, police enabled white supremacist militia members. The result of this failure was bloodshed. The ACLU is saying the police are enabling white supremacist militia members on Twitter. No one should be targeted, threatened, or attacked for exercising our First Amendment right. It's our right to protest and demand justice. We'll be watching to ensure no one, even law enforcement, interferes. As we reimagine public safety, we're going to create solutions for everybody that's neglected and preyed upon. Wild. So ACLU then is going to be filing lawsuits, as you can imagine, if they have not already, against everybody in Kenosha, wanting to secure big verdicts and big settlements, blaming them for supporting white supremacists and white supremacy militia groups. Oh, man. Wild. All right. So what else do we have? ACLU of Maryland, they chimed in similarly. They said dangerous, disgusting, unacceptable white supremacy. White supremacy, they call it a system of oppression. And that white supremacy system of oppression is dangerous, disgusting, and unacceptable. I really don't, I really don't know what they're talking about, but okay. So we had this very interesting article come out from MSNBC. Let's indulge this for a second so we can see how these people think. Kyle Rittenhouse trial, according to this guy, Jahan Jones, says that his trial was designed to protect white conservatives who kill. The entire trial. The shooter's homicide acquittal coddles conservatives and may lead to even more violence. Written November 19th by Jahan Jones. It says he fatally shot 2 people, but calls this an outrageous yet unsurprising verdict in a trial marred by controversy. We get some background. We know enough of that. We know he was found not guilty. Got that. The case had the makings of an acquittal before the trial even began. Why? Almost exclusively white jury pool, he says. Judge said you can call them rioters and looters, but not victims, which apparently is illegal, even though we have what's called the presumption of innocence. Rittenhouse is a white teen, abides by white rules, and white people are empathetic to those, and they're going to insulate him for the repercussions. The day he pled not guilty to felony homicide, Rittenhouse flashed a white supremacist symbol. He was loudly serenaded by a group of men at a bar. On the night of the shooting, officers, minutes before he opened fire, they thanked the rifle-toting team, saying, "We appreciate you guys, we really do." We played that video here. Law enforcement, including a department known to cover up its own lawless act, gave Rittenhouse cover from the get-go. With these endorsements, Jahan Jones says white conservatives felt all the more comfortable swaddling Rittenhouse in the protection they often give to police and vigilantes serving white conservative interests, from people like George Zimmerman to Mark and Patricia McCloskey. Rittenhouse is their latest darling, pitifully seeing heroism in an armed team who set out to patrol pro-black protests as though he were police. I can't even take these articles, man. Pitiful as they are, we can't dismiss his supporters as conservatives. Last year, then President Trump's administration issued talking points, which we're going to hear from. Said that Rittenhouse was there to defend small business owners. All right. Enough of this article. The jury's decision was dangerous to an endorsement of that vision, to own the libs. Oh my gosh. So hopefully you brought your salt buckets, because there's a lot of that. Thanksgiving's next week, isn't it? That's right. And so you've got a lot of salt from these people that you can spread all over your Thanksgiving turkey. It's going to taste delicious. A lot of people now also asking questions about defamation and what are Kyle Rittenhouse's options for recourse. Can he win a verdict. I'm not a defamation lawyer. I don't do civil claims, so I can't really opine on that. But Mark Richards gets asked about it. And he also gets asked about people like President Biden commenting about this and people like Donald Trump and others commenting about it. What does he say? Here's Mark Richards.
And I'm not laughing at President Biden. What I'm laughing at is a friend of mine who's a lawyer said, he goes, and him and I had done a big case together 7-8 years ago. And he said, do you think this Rittenhouse is going to be bigger than that case? And I said, you know, I do. And he said, why do you say that? And I said, I've never had a case, and I don't think I ever will, where within 2 days or 3 days of one another, you know, the president and the presidential candidate comment on it. And both of them had such different beliefs. President Biden said some things that I think are so incorrect and untrue. He's not a white supremacist. I'm glad that he at least respects the jury verdict. And if the government had any information regarding his cell phone or anything, that he'd been to any of those websites or been online doing that kind of stuff, it would have been introduced in evidence. It wasn't. We were the individuals who released his cell phone, which couldn't be cracked by the FBI because we had nothing to hide.
Yeah, there's no evidence of white supremacy in this case at all. And the government got a full direct copy of Kyle Rittenhouse's phone. And Mark Richards says, look, they would have been able to go onto his browser, look at his cookies, see what the history looks like and what websites he's been to, you know, whitesupremacyamerica.com or whatever he goes to, you know, it is the allegation. He didn't go to any of those websites because that's not who he is. He's not that type of a person. But you get people like Jahan Jones and others that make everything about white supremacy, no matter what, make everything about black versus white, even though it isn't, make everything about Kyle Rittenhouse wanting to stop a BLM protest from happening when Joseph Rosenbaum was running around dropping the N-word every other sentence. So it's all political at this point. And you can see that even on the back of a victory, even when a jury in a justice system comes back and says, hey, we took a look at it and the evidence is bad, even when people like Joe Scarborough and Anna Kasparian and many others say, oh, the evidence came out, we were wrong about that, we're going to kind of backtrack that a little bit. Even then, it still becomes a black versus a white thing, and it becomes a racist, white supremacy, militia argument. Always. It's never going to end. And so what do you do about that? Well, you just ignore those people, and you just laugh at them. You just play their articles, and you just laugh at them. And you just say, what a ridiculous joke this is. And so we'll just continue to do that here. Now, speaking of what Joe Biden had to say about this, when he was a lot more competent and mentally available, he said something like this. Jewish Deplorable reminded us of this, says, Biden went on CNN last year and accused Rittenhouse of being part of a white supremacist militia. I hope Kyle sues the S out of him. Here is how that sounded.
Well, look, I don't know enough to know whether that 17-year-old kid, exactly what he did, but allegedly he's part of a militia coming out of the state of Illinois.
No.
Have you ever heard this president say one negative thing about white supremacists? Have you ever heard it? That's the reason I got back in this race, because what happened in Charlottesville. People coming out of the woods carrying torches, their veins bulging.
All right, so white supremacist militia out of Illinois. You're going, that's not true at all. But they needed this narrative. They needed, Joe Biden and the media needed this. They needed a launching point so that they could turn this back into an attack on Donald Trump. And Kyle Rittenhouse was being used by both sides back then, being used by the left to push forward this narrative that Donald Trump is a racist white supremacist and that anybody who supports him or anybody who defends Kyle Rittenhouse by proxy is a white supremacist or somebody who is, you know, insurrectionary. And I forgot to change the screen. So that was then also Donald Trump was president back then when this happened. Here's what he said back at that time.
Go ahead, please. Yeah, go ahead, please.
It was a supporter of yours, Mr. President.
I'm just going to condemn the act.
It was a supporter of yours.
Go
Mr. President.
All right, something, I don't know what happened there. Let me see if I can fix that slide so that we can actually play that. There may be two videos.
Go ahead,
please. Yeah, go ahead, please.
It was a supporter of yours, Mr. President.
I'm just going to condemn the act.
Looks like.
Actions of vigilantes like Kyle.
All right, here it is. Sorry about that, folks. We're going to play it like this.
It's like Kyle Rittenhouse.
We're looking at all of it. That was an interesting situation. You saw the same tape as I saw. And he was trying to get away from them, I guess, it looks like. And he fell. And then they very violently attacked him. And it was something that we're looking at right now, and it's under investigation. But I guess he was in very big trouble. He would have been. He probably would have been killed. But it's under investigation.
Do you think private citizens should be taking guns?
I'd like to see law enforcement take care of everything. I think everything should be taken care of, law enforcement. But again, we have to give our cops back, our police back, their dignity, the respect. They're very talented people. They're strong.
All right, so he goes into the cop spiel again. But yeah, he might have been killed. He would have been killed if he didn't do what he did there. And so that was Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. And so a tremendous day of victory for Kyle Rittenhouse. And so we want to celebrate it for the rest of the show and see what you have to say about this. Let's jump over to locals first and see what we've got. We've got some questions that have been rolling in. Let's see where we're starting today. Those were yesterday's questions. What's going on here? A lot of questions came in yesterday, but where are today's questions? All right, here it is. Me Loves Dog says, what did Darth Crypto contribute to Kyle's defense? He seemed that he had some evidence get them over to the weekend. Not sure. Yay for Kyle. That was from Me Loves Dogs. I don't know. So I just started following Darth Crypto, and apparently he's been doing great work on the case, so make sure you go check him out. News Now Wyoming says, even if you've already talked about it, can we spend a few more minutes talking about those, quote, fake cries while he was on the stand? When I told my mom today that he had more of her fake tears while the verdict was being read and she should watch it to see if her original opinion changed, she refused, saying she has no interest in watching him being found not guilty. I don't hate ignorance. I hate willful ignorance. Oh, no. So Mom, it sounds like for News Now, doesn't believe Kyle's tears, called them fake tears. And then what we saw today, again, looked to be, exactly genuine, just like when he was testifying. I mean, sorry about that, News Now. Hopefully your mom, comes out of that soon. But Henry Dixon says, after watching Kyle's attorney deliberately leave out the names of the original attorneys who hired them to the case, Barnes included, was left surprised by that. Why do you think Mr. Richards would obfuscate the people who hired him to the case that he alleges were interested in broader political causes? That's from Henry, modding away over there. Shout out and thank you, Henry. So I think he was, I'm not sure to whom he was referring, but when I was thinking about it, I wasn't thinking about Barnes. I thought that Barnes was sort of a, not an attorney of record on the criminal case, but somebody who is sort of included in the court of public opinion type of conversation. But I don't know, right? I don't know the specifics of any of that, and I've tried to stay out of it. But what I suspected he was talking about was John Pierce and Lynn Wood. And I don't think he was trying to obfuscate it. I think he was trying to belittle them a little bit by not using their names. Right? I think he was sort of disgusted or upset with them. So he wasn't trying to obfuscate it. He was just like, I'm not even going to mention them because they're so, not pleasant. Ben Tomlinson says, I'm so glad about the Rittenhouse verdict. Let's all give praise to Juror 54, the likely, quote, Karen, who did the right thing and did not hang the jury. How much of an overall impact do you think Riccata's stream had on the trial? Additionally, I'm so glad in the U.S. you have televised trial. In Canada, we don't, which means that the only reporting comes from journalists present in the courtroom. I personally do not see the benefit of that. What do you think about televised trials? Well, I like televised trials. I think that they're good. I'd like to see more of what's happening. I think that we certainly have risk of impeding the judicial process if we have, journalists that are chasing around, jury buses. That's not a good thing. If we have jurors like Brandon Mitchell who are elbowing their way to get on the jury panel, that's not a good thing. We need to make sure that the system of justice is being protected and not eviscerated by public interest. We don't want the court of law to turn into Judge Judy proceedings. That's not what we want at all. But we also want to see what goes on here. I'm also very grateful that what we saw in this courtroom was broadcast by people like Nick Rekieta that had 100,000 people on his stream on a regular basis, or 80 to 100, regularly. That's amazing. Did the stream have an impact on the outcome of the trial? That I don't know. I don't know what Mark Richards was doing, if they were browsing YouTube or if they were communicating with people. I would guess that they had people who were feeding them information. And if the people on Rekieta's stream were gathering good information and sending it their way, absolutely. I don't put it past it that they could have a dramatic impact on the outcome of the trial, but I don't know. But I do know that they had a dramatic impact in the court of public opinion. They were able to communicate exactly what was going on in real time in a way that got a lot of people to see all the disgusting stuff that often happens inside of a courtroom. And I'm grateful that America got to see it and that the outcome was what it was, because this is not an aberration. This happens very regularly every day in the court of law. But it doesn't happen to somebody that we all know about. It happens 1,000 times a day to many nameless, faceless defendants all around the country, which is why we do what we do here at our law firm. It's why we're so passionate about it, because we want to help people like Kyle Rittenhouse, or even people that may not be 100% innocent but are still good people and don't deserve to have their lives wrecked into oblivion. So I think that the more people that are talking about these issues and bringing it to light, the better. We have Speech Unleashed says, do you think GoFundMe can be sued by Kyle for removing the fund? After all, they use the excuse of not wanting to support criminal activity, made clear that he was never criminally guilty. So I don't think so. I mean, there's probably pretty robust terms and conditions and different policies there that you sort of just agree to having your fundraiser booted off if you use their service, I would guess. And so I don't think that would be fruitful, other than it might, like you said, dissuade them from being overly political in the future. I don't know. Woods08 says, well, Robert, we can now believe in our justice system. This young man has been dismissed. He can now live a free man. State case fell apart. I hope they get reprimanded by their superiors. That's from Woods. Good to see you, Woods. We've got Law Medic says, what an amazing day. So happy for Kyle and his family. What a crazy ride. I cannot say that this trial has not given the world a brief bunch of amazing memes, though. I'm not sure what to do with myself now without you and Rekieta. I know, man, it's been like a whirlwind. I'll tell you what, I'm very relieved for Kyle. I'm very relieved for his family. I'm very relieved for everybody. And I'll tell you, it was a long road. It was a long road for Kyle. It was a long road for everybody. And so I think that even though that, all of us are sort of in this rhythm and this pace of being glued to the data, glued to the screen. When's this coming on red alert? It's going to be good to just go, oh, okay, fine, justice, finally. We got some justice in this case. It's going to be a good breather for everybody. John and Heather says, the missus and I were personally invested in this case for a myriad of reasons. This feels like the first, quote, win we've had in a long while. It was great to follow this with everyone here on Locals, and I second that, John and Heather. It's been a lot of work, for me. It's been a lot of energy. It's been a lot of investment. And I know that many of you have been along for every minute of all of that. And so I'm so grateful for it. It's like we've been through this, when you go through the gauntlet, they call it, together, you kind of come out and you're like bros at the other end, like we survived that, and we did. And it was a grueling case. We learned a lot together. We put a lot of time in, and it was the right outcome. So we've got Wisconsin Lover says, so it appears as if Robert Barnes, who was very, very present before Kyle's verdict, speaking badly against the defense, has been a little quiet. I'm disappointed with Barnes. I've lost respect for him. Whoa. He has been acting very butthurt. However, me knowing Wisconsin well, I understand why he may have been disinvited. Barnes thinks he knows Kenosha well, but Barnes assembling a dream team and swooping in is about the last thing that unassuming Kenosha jurors would like. Likewise, Wisconsinites like to see self-defense defendants on the stand. One of the primary faults with the defense as well. I'm sorry Barnes has stooped so low. So, listen, Wisconsin Lover, I've been following what Barnes has been saying. I think Barnes is a very good lawyer. I think he's very intelligent. I think he's got a lot of astute observations, and I think that, it's very normal and commonplace for lawyers to have disagreements. I mean, this is why it's called practicing law. There really is no right way to do it. There are many different ways of skinning a pineapple or whatever, skinning a cat. There's a number of different things that are all right. And it's hard to determine what is the correct course when you can't test the opposite, so you don't know. Like, for example, for me, I had a strong opposition to putting Kyle on the stand. They did. They won. Now, if they didn't put Kyle on the stand, well, they might have won anyways, right? They might have won regardless. Maybe they would have won in 1 day or 3 hours in a verdict deliberation, or maybe they would have lost if they didn't put him on the stand. Who knows, right? It's really easy to sort of second guess and play those games. All I know, man, is I'm just happy as hell that he is acquitted. I did have some qualms with some of the defense team, but I don't live in Wisconsin. I don't know how it works. I think your points are well taken about unassuming Kenosha jurors and things like that. Something I wouldn't have noticed, like I said, was that they want to hear from the defendant in Wisconsin. And that's what Mark Richards said. Oh no, here in this town, they want to hear from you. Okay. So I give attorneys in basically all situations a lot of leeway because it's complicated stuff and everybody's got an opinion. And so, it's hard to test any alternatives, but I appreciate you sharing your perspective there. And maybe there are others who agree with you. Teresa says, hey, Rob, been watching your show for over a year now. So relieved that Kyle is free. Watching your show really has given me a new perspective. I was meeting with a parent of one of my students the other day, and he said he was a prosecutor, and all I could think of was, oh, bummer, that's too bad. I definitely have a whole new appreciation for criminal defense attorneys after this trial. Keep up the great work. Well, thank you, Teresa. And I agree with you. Look, and it doesn't mean he's a bad person. I'm sure he's a really nice guy. Probably has a good little son. Maybe the son will be a hall monitor for your school and prosecute everybody who's late. Little punk. No, but that's funny. Thanks for sharing that. And hopefully, hopefully you stick around, even though you've got a prosecutor watching. We've got many people talked about KR should have testified, but I think it was really the tipping point for the jury. They were able to see it through his eyes. It could be that. Yeah, absolutely could be that. All right, let's see. We had a couple other questions come in. Let's jump over to YouTube and see what we've got over here. We had, at the start of the show, we had not applicable says the diaper is Biden's nickname. We have Tom Richards says, I'm celebrating with a cigar and a scotch. Great day for America and the Second Amendment community. As always, appreciate the thorough analysis and the coverage. Well, thank you, Tom. I'm glad that you're here. No whiskey for me or no scotch for me, but cheers, my friend, to a great day of justice. Oh, yeah. Cheers. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's delicious. Taste of justice right there. Parched is gone. I am now refreshed with freedom in America. We have another question from Bobby Moody. Says, so happy for Kyle and the USA. Cheers to Bobby Moody. Also, Halloween Ball says, thank you so much, Robert, for all you do. Justice, finally. Well, I didn't do much on any of this stuff other than just hang out with all of you and talk about it. And so I'm grateful for your time being here and for your support. Glad you're here, Halloween Ball. Still Sleeping says, every lawyer in this country should get together and sue the F out of the media and everyone who slandered this kid and everyone else for that matter. I'm sure that there are a lot of lawyers who saw the verdict today and they're all just sort of salivating, going, oh, perfect. Exactly what we needed. And so I'm sure that Kyle's going to have a lot of people reaching out and putting together a team. Another question, donation from John Suna. Thank you, John. Bianca says, I'm not crying. You're crying. I've watched the verdict at least 4 times. I cry every single time. Thank God for this today. Any thoughts on the federal charge rumors? DOJ review? Well, we played the clip of Jerry Nadler, or the tweet of Jerry Nadler. So he is recommending a referral over to the DOJ. Biden came out, though, and said that we're going to respect the decision of the jurors. Didn't say anything about, further inquiry or investigation or anything. And so the big question is, is Jerry Nadler's request going to carry any weight? Who knows? Probably not. Zulu says, I am pleased with the outcome, but are these verdicts some kind of insurmountable reversed leftist conspiracy, or is that out now? I feel like we should think about that. I don't understand what you're asking, Zulu, and I apologize. Probably because it's Friday and I'm a little bit exhausted. But it says insurmountable reversed leftist conspiracy. So is the verdict an insurmountable reverse leftist conspiracy? Like, is the verdict something that can't be overcome by leftists? Or was it a conspiracy? So are you saying that maybe a conviction was a foregone conclusion and it couldn't have been insurmountable, but it was insurmountable? And so maybe it wasn't a leftist conspiracy at all? You're going to have to clarify that for me there, Zulu. I apologize. Caddy Cat says, thank you so much for all your coverage on this. Found you last year looking for info on this case. Watched ever since. Love that you show your heart. Well, thank you, Caddy Cat. Sometimes I can't help it. I'm actually kind of a softie sometimes. CB says, sorry, late. What happens to getting prosecution under oath for the evidence lies? Don't know about any of that. I don't think they should get away with it just because Kyle was found not guilty. They still broke the law. Yeah, and so oftentimes judges will follow up on that. You know, they will continue to say, you know, we're not going to, no, I want to get to the bottom of that, because if you breached your ethical duties in this case, you got to be punished for that. We can't let you possibly do that again. And so the judge may, you know, that may not be a done deal, but it may be something that is investigated off the record outside of Kyle's case. And Teresa Locke says, so grateful that justice was served. A tearjerker moment indeed. Is it possible that Binger may suffer any consequences for his conduct? What would that look like other than public opinion? So if the judge, so the most serious way that this could happen would be the judge looked into this further and said, I don't like what happened here. I don't like that there was an inappropriate, inadvertent disclosure. It didn't turn into a problem, but it very well could have. And so I want to recommend that there is a bar complaint that is sent over to the state bar, and they can investigate it and make a determination about what that means. To disbar him, or to reprimand him, or to sanction him, or to suspend him. Something like that would be a serious marker. Mark Richards, Corey Chirafisi, they could file bar complaints. His office could file a bar complaint and say this was something that was wrong that happened there. His office wouldn't do that, but somebody could file a bar complaint against him. But outside of that, I mean, unless his boss is unhappy with him and fires him, probably not going to be any consequences. Probably going to say, you did a great job. See you on Monday. John Frazier says, justice won this day. It's true. And doesn't it taste good? Half Irish says, can we expect to see the charge against Dominic Black dropped? I hope so. That'd be icing on the cake. I'm not so sure that you're going to see that, but he would be sort of silly to take a plea deal at this moment now, wouldn't he? You'd have to think so. Jay says, thank you for sharing your knowledge. Salt and scotch. Good to see you. Not Applicable says, I have a tough time sympathizing with the other side because my family would not tolerate me doing that, doing what Huber and Rosenbaum did. They would have Rittenhoused me. Is that going to be a verb now? Rittenhoused? Just Cause says, bang the gavel for Kyle, Rob. It's a good point, Just Cause. I should do it right now. And the verdict, my friends, is not guilty. Case dismissed. Get out of here. And that's from Judge Gruler in the offices of Rittenhouse. Kyle is acquitted. Justice reigns. Thank you for the reminder, Just Cause. We have Pesky Citizen says, I'm going to a bar and ordering a Kyle Rittenhouse. A chaser and 4 shots. All right, it's appropriate now. Oh my gosh, that is, oh no. It is a party. This is a celebration party. Gonna order a Kyle Rittenhouse, a chaser and 4 shots. You're gonna get loaded. That's good. Oh, you see what I did there? Man, you're gonna get loaded. Yikes. Okay, keep it together. Sea of Love says, was literally crying from joy for this. Watching him trying to hold himself together was heart-wrenching. Self-defense still exists. It's true. Back over on local, Sergeant Bob says, I think there's a lot of cops for Kyle. You go, defense. That's from Sergeant Bob, giving a shout out to the defense attorneys. Isn't this a beautiful community we have? News Now Wyoming says, why were no video cameras on Sauer Kraus during the reading of the verdict? I really wanted to see that. They were helping preserve their dignity. Nadler's dirty diaper is here. I knew he was going to show up here. I knew it. When I clipped that tweet of Jerry Nadler, I knew that his diaper was going to be here, and it's going to just be a problem for this show. We're trying to have a celebration party. We're trying to have a victory party here. And Jerry Nadler, every time we try to do something nice, he ruins it. He shows up. He's getting heavier and heavier. Let's see what he says. Nadler's dirty diaper is here. It says, please help me. I still haven't been changed. And with Jerry so upset, I have now grown so much. I'm now 37.5 pounds. and I have had no choice but to leak. So I shed 1 pound. It's not pretty. It's from Nadler's dirty diaper. We're trying to run a show. We're trying to have a party here, Nadler. And you're referring Rittenhouse for criminal charges to the DOJ, and you can't even change your own dirty diaper. It's at 37.5 pounds now, and it's leaking all over Congress. The Capitol building is already full of excrement, and now you're actually leaking it. You can't even keep it under control. This is just awful. We have to... Nadler's dirty diaper. Can somebody change Jerry, please? All right. Lawmedic says, so while I'm happy, I still want to see sanctions done for the prosecution. I want to see the system become better. How can we get that done? So prosecutors need to be held accountable. You know, like I said, I don't think that this should be the end of it. I think the judge really should continue to investigate and determine what actually happened with those files. He said that he was going to ask questions about Krause and Binger under oath. I think that's appropriate. I'd like to see what happened there. Transparency and accountability. Those are the important portions of our justice system. If more of this was exposed, if more people saw this on a regular basis and recognized prosecutors do that, people get charged with crimes in cases like this happens regularly, we'd start seeing more demand for change in society, I think. OG Rawl says, thank you so much for what you do. I've learned a lot from you. Hope to learn more, though I hope I never need a criminal defense lawyer as a fellow Arizonan. I have definitely have written your firm's contact information down. Well, that's good news. You know, they say it's better to know us and not need us than it is to need us and not know us. And that's a pretty good policy. So it's good wherever you are to have a defense attorney's phone number available, you know, in your phone book, because you never know when you need them. And if you need one and you don't know them, it's a problem. But if you know one and you happen to need them, you're in a much better position. So I think that's a good strategy. Christina Gonzalez says, Nadler tweeted trying to threaten federal review. Truly pray the feds are not so political that they would come after Kyle, but we need to keep an eye on those morons. Yeah, we had that tweet in the show. Thunder7 says, today is the best day of the year. Thank you, Rob, for guiding us through this for over a year and teaching us what self-defense is and what justice is. I'm glad there are both black and white jurors, as fake news is still calling Kyle a white supremacist. I hear he and his family have to leave the state due to the lunatic left and the threats, but at least he's free and has his whole life ahead. Bang that gavel, Rob, and I certainly did, Thunder7. Thank you for that. We have another one from... Woods says, everyone in here and around the world, we want to give thanks where thanks are giving, but also are due. We want to thank the jury for giving this young man a Thanksgiving with his family. Happy Thanksgiving to Robert and R&R and to all, and to be thankful, everyone. That's from Woods 08. It's a very nice comment. Okay, let's see what else. Okay, so a very long comment from Brian Hack, who actually has an interesting suggestion and says, very long comment. Maybe you could display it for everybody, which I will do. I will not read the whole thing. So take a clip, pause it if you want to read all of that. Talking about the AC/DC of electricity, creating electric fields that provide energy or acquittal at the end, talking about straw man. I'm going to read that later, but that is a long one. I don't want to read a whole comment. Ben Tomlinson says, do you think that Rittenhouse has grounds for malicious prosecution civil case against ADA Binger? Here are 3 things that he should be sanctioned for. Suborning perjury, so getting witnesses to lie on the stand like Sam and Sal. Fifth Amendment violations, commenting on the right to counsel, the right to silence. Improper, if not manipulated, disclosure of evidence. So that's from Ben Tomlinson, which is a great summation of 3 major problems. And I think that you've got grounds for filing that. I think you've got very strong grounds for filing a bar charge, a bar complaint based on those things. I think that, you know, those would have been great justifications for a motion to dismiss with prejudice, which we saw some of that in there. So, you know, these are significant consequential legal problems. It's just about the remedy. You know, is the DA going to punish his own staff for these problems? Probably not. Is the state bar going to punish prosecutors for this stuff? Probably not. They're prosecutors. And so is anything going to happen? Probably not. That's why we started this channel and this show. It's to shine that spotlight. And this is one of the first times that we've seen a spotlight this bright shone down upon a prosecutor's office like this, in large part thanks to you, thanks to people like Ricada and other lawyers who are organizing streams where people can get up and shout from the rooftops about these unethical behaviors that are taking place all over the country. AJ says, I'm not going to lie, I watched the verdict reading with my 17-year-old son, struggled to hold back tears. God bless this young man. I hear you, AJ. Thanks for sharing that. 3 Girly says, you know God is in control when the defense's 3 strongest jurors were pulled out as alternates. Yeah, the 3 strongest jurors are out, and they still get not guilties. Black Cat Meow says, hi, Rob. Thanks so much for all your hard work and coverage of the trial and in general. I'm beyond excited for the verdict and for Kyle. Do you think the case against Dominic Black will be dropped for providing him with the gun? I mean, ordinarily, I would say yes, but Thomas Binger is a very unhappy and vindictive man. So I'm not so sure. Sergeant Bob says, don't forget that Kyle could still use donations for legal bills. Give early and give often. I would just recommend that you know where you're giving and you know where the money's going, because there's a lot of people who are grifting off this. Sergeant Bob says, don't forget Kyle could... Oh, I already read that one. Thank you, Sergeant Bob. But again, a good reminder to make a donation if you can afford it and you have a good place to help. Let's go back over to YouTube. Sea of Love says, was literally crying from joy for watching this. Him trying to hold himself together was heart-wrenching. Still Sleeping says, bruh, they defunded the police. LMAO, come on. Yeah, how can the police get out there and do something when you defunded them? Christy Irwin says, I'm here for the party. Woohoo! Thank you for your excellent coverage. Well, I'm glad that you're here, Christy. We're all celebrating. It's been a good day. Colorado Sarge says, in Nebraska, if you're acquitted in a self-defense criminal case, you cannot have a civil case brought against you afterwards. Oh, very interesting. So you don't get 2 cracks at that. That's very interesting. I've not heard of that. Sounds like a pretty reasonable law. Dapper Dave says, what does it say about our society and when this becomes a nail-biter of a decision because of the mainstream media lies? Kyle was clearly innocent. It's nerve-wracking. I will tell you this. As a defense lawyer, I was concerned that this was going to be like the new normal. It's like, can we ever win anywhere? If Kyle Rittenhouse is found guilty, are we ever going to win a case ever again anywhere? Because that was an obvious case of innocence. And if he loses, it's like, ugh. But he didn't. Jurors did the right thing. And so what does it say? I think it renews my faith largely that real American, in real parts of America can see things and can hide and look through all the red herrings that the government and the media tries to cram down everybody's throats. David Stern says, loving the coverage. I had a question in respect to Kyle suing for defamation. Obviously, any claim made by the prosecution during trial protects news orgs that said the same. But what about Facebook? They blocked fundraising efforts, caused real damages. So again, David, it's a great question. And I wish that there was a better answer on this. But I think that the nuts and bolts of the answer is that they have their terms and services and their policies, and they get to make decisions about who does what on their platforms. And you can sue them, but what are you going to recover? And if it's about monetary damages, I don't think that that's likely. If it's to prove a point, I'm not sure that that's likely either, because they just have entire legal departments that are just set up to just bat these things down. They are bigger than most countries. I mean, Facebook, it's bigger than it's like the size of an army. It's in terms of GDP and things, they're huge. So it's just sort of a Tuesday for them. And I'm not sure that it's going to result in a moral victory. This is victory. I think that Kyle Rittenhouse, is going to have a bright future ahead of him. I'm sure he's learned a lot of lessons from this, and he's going to be able to impart a lot of knowledge. Anytime that you go through trials and tribulations and you go through hardships, you typically come out the other end with some pretty dang good wisdom. And that's valuable. And that can be communicated to everybody out in the world. And I think that Kyle will do that. William Tulo says, my stomach was in knots when I was waiting for the verdict. I cannot imagine how Kyle felt, but I'm glad an innocent man remains free. So am I there, William. So am I, as is everybody else. We've got Jenny says, thank you for what you do, Rob. Thank you, Jenny. I appreciate you being here and for that support. We have Dapper Dave says, is it worth Kyle suing Grosskreutz or don't rehash it? The problem with suing Grosskreutz is I'm sure he doesn't have any money. What are you going to collect from him? So, you might be able, even if you were to sue him and win, if you had a claim, what are you going to recover? He doesn't have any money. That's why he's suing for $10 million. Llama Brad says, how do you feel about Mark Richards' post-interview assertion that you have to put your client on the stand in Wisconsin? I like it. I mean, I like that he had a reason for it. I'm not so sure what he bases that reason on, other than probably his own anecdotal experience and the experience of other jurors, out there. Self-defense cases are not very common, and your client taking the stand is also not very common. So there's probably just sort of local practice that he's familiar with, and he says, man, maybe I haven't tried 100 self-defense cases, but I've tried 2, and I know that when I put my client on the stand, these 2 it worked for me, and I know that these other 2 lawyers, these other 20 lawyers also did it, and they also had more success. And so he's just sort of going by the local feel of the jurisdiction. A lot of people think that law is like a spreadsheet. Like you put a number in and then you add it and you enter a calculation and it spits out something else. It's a lot less like that than it is like a piece of art or like, sculpting something. There's no real right way or wrong way to do it. You're just kind of creating something. And sometimes it looks beautiful and it works great, and sometimes it doesn't. But, here, Mark Richards had a style and he pursued it. He made decisions based on the knowledge that he had at the time, and it worked out. So it's hard to argue with it. But it's a great question. Kevin Collins says, will Binger give a press conference now? No, he will not. He's already communicated. He already released a statement saying that he's not going to be releasing a statement. He said, I looked into those ethical rules and we can't talk about it. So nope, nothing's going to happen from him. How likely are charges for the prosecutors? What would they be hypothetically? I think probably 0. Like if you're talking about criminal charges, I would say 0. They're highly protected by different layers of immunity. Their office is not going to charge them with crimes. The judge is not going to recommend them be charged with crimes. They would, worst case scenario would be probably a bar complaint. But even then, I doubt that, because they've got plausible deniability for everything they did. We all know what they did, but they've at least got plausible deniability for it. Red Jersey says, Rob, do you think the judge would have declared a mistrial if Kyle was found guilty? I think probably he would have, or he would have done something about it. When he was looking through the verdicts and verifying what came in, you could see his blood pressure drop in real time. You could see his face go from stern and very concerned to, here you go. I'm calm and at peace now because I know what's going to happen. He's not going to have to address it. So I think that he had that in his back pocket if he needed it, but he didn't. Cher says, thank you. I could have never understood this trial's workings without you. Well, thank you, Cher. I appreciate that's a nice compliment. I'm glad that you're here, and I hope that I did it justice because it was a very important trial, and I'm glad that we got the verdict that we did. 4 Doors More Whores is here, says, I'm free at last. And also, bruh, you're famous now, so well done. Tager with Iffy says, hopefully Kyle can sleep better at night now. I'm sure he can. I'm sure many of us will too. Wolfgang Deo says, apparently today is International Men's Day. I saw that, and it's kind of a nice day for him to be acquitted, isn't it? 4 Doors More Whore says, what happens to the AR-15? Well, in my opinion, I don't know what Wisconsin law is, but I would ask that be returned. It's perfectly, it was evidence in a criminal trial, but there's no criminal conviction. That's now to be released. That's his property. Get it back over to him. So I'm not sure what they're going to do with that, but that's what I'd be doing. Sea of Love says, what I find even more amazing is that the verdict came from an unsequestered jury. I'm beyond impressed. Yeah, they did. And they actually made some comments I saw in the New York Times this morning saying that some people were saying, allegedly, the jurors were saying that the media coverage was crazy, which begs the question, why were you looking at the media coverage? We also have John Paul with a nice donation. Thank you, John. We've got News Now says, MSNBC made a big deal out of officially having our first woman president. Yeah, first woman president. What was her approval rating? 28%. Not a huge victory. We have Adam Marco says, Baby Binger Littlefinger had a trial but could not winger. Forced to prosecute, he could not bail, but little Baby Binger failed. Legal nursery rhymes. I like that a lot. Baby Binger Littlefinger had a trial but couldn't wing her. Forced to prosecute, he could not bail, but Little Binger failed. Little Baby Binger failed. Is that a limerick? Is it kind of a limerick? What are limericks? I have to look that up. I think that might be a limerick. Lauren P. says, the Kandry brothers must be ecstatic. We'll see. Binger's probably not going to be happy with them, but we'll see. Not Applicable says, do it, Nadler. Watch what happens. You scumbag from Not Applicable. Miss Eva says, any idea how this will affect Dominic Black? Will Binger try to take out his anger on him? What about Zeminski? So Dominic Black, you know, it sounds like he's already been offered some sort of a deal, or they've been communicating about a deal. Remember that he is actively being prosecuted, and he was still called by the government to testify. And the defense hit that pretty hard. They said, well, you're kind of biased, aren't you? Because you're sort of testifying in exchange for the prosecution giving you a deal for testifying. So you're kind of biased. And so, you know, I don't know what the nature of that conversation was, or if the defense attorney for Dominic Black communicated with the prosecutor and said, listen, we'll testify, but we want some assurances on the back end that you're not going to do X, Y, and Z. And so those may have already been, you know, established. So Binger may be sort of locked with that witness because he negotiated something for that person. So I don't know what happened there, but you know, if everything is equal, I don't foresee Binger dropping charges against anybody. I mean, he is righteous as hell on this case, and he's going to keep on going. James Ulrich with the donation. Thank you, James. K. Bean says, Rob, let's see the gavel drop. We got that already, K. Bean. I almost broke the desk with George Klaus's monster gavel. Look at this thing. Look at the wood on this thing. It's a beautiful thing. Oh, look at that. Oh, it's just gorgeous. And folks, it's got some heft to it. When you feel this thing, it's meaty. Look at this. It's meaty. It's almost, look at that. I love it. And it's the gavel of justice. Fighter 4 Street says, will Kyle get his AR-15 back? I think that he should. He has not been convicted of any crimes, so why not? So yes, he should, right? It's his property. It should be returned to him. Drew says, Donald Trump, quote, it looked like he was in big trouble. If he didn't do that, he would be dead. More compelling than any defense Richard offered in closing. Marty Lund says, all trials, especially Fed, should be streamed unless there's gravely extenuating circumstances, not gate-kept by state-approved media conglomerates. I agree with that. It's a major bummer that the Ghislaine Maxwell trial is not going to be televised, and that many of these other federal trials are not testified because they're quite important. Wolfgang Deo says, meh, Robert Barnes was invested, so... Well, I mean, a lot of us were invested in it, no doubt about that. Tuamos Holo says, does Kyle have a good case for prosecutorial misconduct in a defamation lawsuit? He was 17 at the time. So defamation, I can't speak to. I'm not a lawyer there. But, you know, actual malice against a non-public figure would be something that I think you could prove. We just heard on the show from Joe Biden that called him a militia member from Illinois that traveled across state lines. And you go, that's not accurate at all. Where are you getting that from? It's pretty malicious. And so for defamation, I'm not sure, you know, if that would meet that standard, or at least maybe not be successful in court, but be enough to at least trigger a settlement, something that they could resolve monetarily later down the line. Prosecutorial misconduct, we've kind of talked about that previously. I think that you can make a bar complaint about that, and you leave it up to the bar to decide. But honestly, they've got plausible deniability, I think, for most of it. So I'm not sure that anything happens there. Thank you for that, though, Tuamas. We have Kimberly P. says, so what's going to happen with the Dems lawsuit? Was so excited about the verdict, but the Dems are putting a damper on it. What's going to happen with their lawsuits? I'm not sure which lawsuits you're talking about, Kimberly P. Going to have to take a look at those. Dapper Dave says, can any law firm file a bar complaint on Binger? So, yes, I mean, anybody can file a bar complaint, but the bar is not really going to take much consideration of it unless there's some really meaty substance there, and more or less unless you've got some standing for it. You know, like, some people might file a bar complaint and just say, I'm unhappy with something that Rob said on the internet. And the bar is going to say, okay, well, are you a client? Like, did he screw your case up? Like, what? So why do you care about this? Okay, well, if you don't have any standing here, well, then we don't care either. So, it's kind of about that. So somebody with some interest in the case, the bar is going to look at that a lot more seriously. So It would be like, Mark Richards or the judge. If they filed something, that would carry a lot of weight. CB says, I think every case Flufferboy and Sauer Klaus prosecute should be aired. I always thought the legal system was corrupt, but this truly opened my eyes. It terrifies me for the people of Kenosha that these two will continue. That's from CB. Well, hopefully some of the people over there woke up, and hopefully a lot of people wake up and recognize this is happening in Kenosha, Wisconsin, but it's also happening right around your corner in your local government. Go into your, if you doubt me, go into your prosecutor's office and just say, I don't want to meet with anybody. I just want to stand here and look around. And you'll do that, and you're going to see a Binger and a Kraus in there. I think it's mandatory. When you start a prosecutor's office, they have a checklist. You need poor airdrop files. You need email systems that rename files for you. You need a water bottle that's very big and pink. You need training on how not to use firearms. And you need somebody who looks like Kraus and somebody who looks like Binger. If you have all of those check boxes checked, then you can formalize a prosecutor's office. And so that's what happened, obviously, in Kenosha. Jenny says, I wonder if the police officer that was fired for donating to Kyle Rittenhouse will get his job back and the losses returned to him. Probably not, Jenny. Morgan, it's a good question, though. First of all, I didn't know the police officer got fired. I thought it was a nurse or EMT or somebody like that. Morgan says, funny how Kyle Rittenhouse coincidentally found not guilty on one day. Kamala Harris was president of the United States for a day. So you have some very good news and some very scary things also simultaneously happening. Tara Rayner says, judge granted the motion to dismiss. Would that make it easier for Kyle to seek a remedy? So the motion to dismiss the charges with prejudice was just the byproduct of being found not guilty. So all of that was all part of the same motion. So does it make it more likely for him to seek a remedy? Yes and no. I mean, the discovery violation is a discovery violation, whether Kyle's acquitted or convicted. I mean, what they did was problematic either way. But yeah, certainly an acquittal. I mean, either way, a discovery violation could have serious consequences. If he was convicted, the discovery violation has more consequence in that situation than if not. So you could make the argument that the acquittal actually makes it less likely that anything happens, if you wanted to make that argument. Jay Bilo says, this makes me feel good about the justice system. The jury deliberated for days and went through some intimidation, still came to the right outcome. I agree with you, Jay Bilo. It's a good day. It's a good outcome. Everybody can take a breath of fresh air. Sach is here, says, I am very happy about the verdict, but nervous the DOJ will file charges against Kyle for civil rights violations or something. They had it ready for Chauvin. But the problem with Chauvin is Chauvin was a government employee, and he was working for the government. It was the government doing something against a civilian. It was a government actor violating a civilian's civil rights. Here it was Kyle, who was not a part of the government. So that's why they're talking about transferring. I was talking about crossing state lines, weapons trafficking. Those things are different offenses that might give the government jurisdiction over new charges. News Now says it is technically Dominic's gun. So that's my point. So it should go back to Dominic then. Somebody should be getting that gun back. It shouldn't be sitting in Thomas Binger's closet anywhere. Wolfgang says, enshrine Kyle's AR in the courthouse. Did you see the article from, I think it was Babylon Bee? It says that Kyle Rittenhouse has now been ordered by the court to go out and defend the courthouse from the protesters. And it's a picture of Kyle Rittenhouse with his AR standing outside in front of the courthouse. It's hilarious. Christy Irwin says, we already read that one. Do you remember the police officer lost his job for donating to the fund? Do you think he's going to win his case against the department now? So maybe I didn't read that one. I'm not familiar with that story. I didn't even hear that happened. A police officer lost his job for donating to, I thought that was an EMT or somebody like that. There was a nurse or somebody, a firefighter. I thought it was somebody like that. I didn't realize it was a police officer. R. Servy with the donation. Thank you, R. Servy. Craig says, do you believe this case is important to the Constitution? So, I mean, yes, I think it's important to the Constitution because it is a case that in which the Constitution applies. So it is an interpretation of the Constitution. It's sort of it's a test. It's a test to see how Americans are interpreting and applying these constitutional principles. So if you're asking, do I think that the case is going to change the Constitution or have implications for constitutional legal interpretation? The answer is no. This is a case that took place in Kenosha. It has no binding precedent on any case here in Arizona or Florida or anywhere else, or really anywhere else in Kenosha, other than the fact that it shows you how jurors think and how this judge might rule on certain issues, but it's pretty much narrowly tailored and limited only to this particular jurisdiction. That being said, it is a very important embodiment, an exercise of the Constitution. It's jurors looking at a set of facts and applying constitutional provisions about the law to those set of facts and coming to a conclusion. I think it's extremely important to keep an eye on the public zeitgeist. What is the belief about how that should work? And the jurors here came back and said, yeah, self-defense. And yeah, this makes sense. And they applied it in a way that I think was done very appropriately. And I'm very grateful that they came to the result that they did. News Now says Dominic was charged with the same gun crime as Kyle, just allowing the minor. I can't see a judge allowing it to continue. Yeah, because they dismissed that same charge against Kyle. We're going to finish. Let's finish up on YouTube, and then we'll go back over to locals and wrap it up. We've got R. Servey says, thanks for the great content, Robert. By the way, big news. Kyle will be on in Tucker's show on Monday night at 8 p.m. Whoa, that is big news. That was the sort of the outlier question. Is Kyle Rittenhouse going to speak? Are we going to hear from him? The answer, of course, is yes, he will speak, but it's just a matter of when. He's going to be on Tucker on Monday night, which is when we broadcast this show. Kyle going on Tucker's show. Maybe we'll reach out to him and maybe we'll connect at some point. We've got Fighter 4, but that's awesome. He's going to do that. Fighter 4 Street says, could the jurors talk about Rosenbaum's felonies? Are you asking during the trial? No, I do not think that any of those got admitted. All the priors did not get admitted. Mitchell Kirkwood says, Dominic is the legal owner. Kyle paid. Which Dominic is facing charges for? No one gets the gun. Okay, so then when Dominic's charges get dismissed, that gun should go back to Dominic. Eddie Oliver says, hey, Rob, couldn't Kyle sue Biden because he was called a white supremacist and militia member before he was president? Think Clinton versus Paula Jones. So I imagine that he could, and I'm sure that he's got lawyers who are prognosticating the legal possibilities with a lawsuit like that, but I can't really speak to the total prospective outcome. Craig says, last donation, can you please answer the previous questions? So I think I got that one from you, Craig. Oh, here's another one. Do you think this case is for self-defense is a constitutional argument for the country? So I think I got both of those, Craig, yeah. And says, thank you for that. So I think we got both of those. Yeah, I think it's kind of narrowly tailored only to Kenosha, but it is important. It is important for other jurors because they can look at this and it can be persuasive to them, right? America goes, okay, we saw what happened with Kyle Rittenhouse. Jurors say that's self-defense. So we all put a pin in that in our minds for the foreseeable future. We all say, Kyle, that was a case of self-defense. We felt that in our hearts. The jurors agreed. It feels like that's a new sort of baseline in law. It's not legally binding, but it sort of sets the new tone. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. We've got Joe Calgano says, found your channel from this case, been subs since. You and all the lawyers on Nick's stream save Kyle as much as anyone. You all told an honest story and you helped change the public perception. Well, so did you, Joe. Thanks for being here and for, the super chat and for joining in on those streams. If there's nobody watching, there's no reason to talk about it. And so as much as you might be appreciative as I am of Nick Rekieta and many others, it's about the momentum. It's about the energy. It's about everybody sort of rallying around this and speaking out for it. And it's amazing. And I'm honored as hell to be a part of it. Eddie Oliver says, and Rob, if you don't know about Clinton versus Jones, then what the hell are they teaching you in law school? Ugh, not about Clinton versus Jones. I had to take family law. I had to take all sorts of ridiculous classes, but I landed in criminal law because that's the sweet spot. Sasha Sisha on Local says, hello, Rob. What a relief. That kid can enjoy the holidays in peace. I hope he moves to a quieter state. So happy for the kid. I can't stand the left on Twitter, though. The continuous pedophile support is getting tiring. I agree with you on that. A lot of salt out over there on Twitter. Jeremy says, Rob, is it risky for a rioter to submit a civil suit? Police didn't authorize violence. They were simply outnumbered. What are your thoughts on the civil side of the suits? Wouldn't people be better off suing the state for failing to protect the citizens, which is where they're doing? Kyle's actions were officially blessed as legal. Who would have standing to bring a civil suit? So, I mean, basically anybody can bring a civil suit, Jeremy. So your question's pretty broad. But if they're suing, what I think you're asking about is the Huber family's statement. And I think that they are suing the government. And the reason they're doing that is because they have deep pockets and they're free to sue them. I mean, what are my thoughts on the civil side of the lawsuits? They're free to bring them. I don't think that they're going to be successful in them, but yeah, I mean, they're free to bring them. Anybody can bring them. Tremendous says, I second your point about all the people involved being human beings. They all deserve our empathy. No person is 100% evil. No person is 100% good. I hope that every person has someone or many someones who love them unconditionally no matter what they do. I am so happy that Kyle was acquitted. I believe that justice was served, but my heart does go out to the families of the people who died that night. No one was a winner in this whole mess. So many of the lives were destroyed, or at least have taken unexpected detours, and we cannot imagine in a matter of minutes. I have been and will continue to pray for all of them. It's a nice comment from Tremendous. I think it is important to connect with that empathy from time to time. Okay, other thoughts here. We have English Dave and English Don says, I'm watching you with my girlfriend. We're made up that Kyle was found not guilty. He should be so proud of himself throughout the whole process, especially during the verdict. Is it likely that Kyle will take any legal action against those who have smeared him? If so, how likely is he to be successful? Any chance of a resolution for Biden's comments? So again, another defamation question. It's a good one. And hello, English Dave and English Don. I don't know about the success, the likelihood of that. And I don't know that it's appropriate to even think about it in that way, to frame it as a victory, other than a chance of a resolution, as you mentioned, which would be in the terms of a settlement. So oftentimes you just file the suit so you can settle it and get some money out of it that way, not necessarily on whether you're going to be successful, because that would be a success, in other words. So it's hard to answer, and I think there's precedent for that in the case of Nick Sandmann, who did settle, but we don't know what the verdict or what the outcome of those settlements were because they were all done under non-disclosure agreements. English Dave, though, says the $2 million the government got for Kyle to get out of bail, that gets refunded, right? It does, and it goes back to whomever. We don't know. They're going to fight over it, according to Mark Richards. Cora says, I held up my phone in my hand, playing the final moments for my life partner. My hands were shaking. I was impatient. We erupted with cheers when justice was served. For all the blunders, the seemingly endless missed objections from the defense, the unlawful, underhanded, repulsive actions from the prosecution, it worked out the way it should have. I love that Corey aided in calming Kyle down after the verdict. At last, the defense showed that sweet adolescent child some affection. Maybe they listened to you, Rob. Anyway, I'm gushing. To his credit, I see what Richards meant when he said he didn't want to defend a crusade, a cause. He wanted to defend a client. This victory coincides with the full moon eclipse. Coincidence? I think not. Bless Kyle Rittenhouse. That's from Cora. Very good comment. Thank you for that. Brian Hack says, everyone was expecting a jury that would quickly ascertain things. Turns out they wanted to deliberate. Perhaps we should just hope for longer juries instead of 20-minute decisions in the future. Sean O'Halloran says, while I'm overjoyed with the verdict, I'm very disillusioned with the whole system. I don't want to even get into all the ethical violations, including blatant and intentional violations, of the defendant's constitutional rights without consequence. Those are part of a completely different discussions. More personally, the message that has been sent is that whether or not you're justified in using deadly force to defend your own life or your family's, whether or not you're acquitted, the state will destroy your life and that of your families. Krauss made it very clear. Sometimes you just need to take a beating, which of course, as the prosecution implied during the whole case, extends to sacrificing your life to those who would try to take it. I'm at the point where I just want to sell my guns and say, F it, just kill me. I won't try to defend myself. It might be better, will be better for my family. Well, Sean, I understand your sentiment and your statement there. Hopefully you don't do that. And justice was done in this case. But you're right. Lives are still destroyed. Kyle's life is dramatically worse off thanks to the government. Vienticus says, of course you see people still with the narrative of white supremacy. I was pointing out earlier that people who pay attention to the wrong parts of the slogans like white power, the second word power is really the word of concern. The first word is just the means. At the end of the day, power is only really concerned about power. That's just human nature. The other stuff is a red herring. That's from Vienticus. Captain Jim says, hey, Rob, always appreciated your show. I appreciate your objectivity and consideration about of all sides. Do you think this win was largely because of the defense or in spite of them? How would you rate them on a 1 to 10? With the 10, Kyle defends himself without an AR-15, of course, and 10 equals the R&R law group. So it's a hard question to answer, Jim. I mean, the reason being is because it's a stylistic difference. And an acquittal on all accounts is a 10 as far as I can tell. He got a 10 outcome. So that's pretty great. You can't do better than a full, complete acquittal. So I'd give them a 10 out of 10 on it. Now, the modality, the mechanism by which they got there, I would have done it differently, obviously. I'm a lot more, I would say, anal about all the minutia and details. I mean, you see sort of how I handle the show and how I prep my slides and all this stuff. I would have been a lot more thorough and granular and detail oriented. And I would have probably thrown a fit about a lot of the details about words like militia and about evidence and those types of things. But I couldn't do better than all charges not guilty. He got a 10 as far as I can tell. So, that's that. I mean, it's a home run. It's a grand slam. It's an absolute win. So I'd give him a 10 out of 10. You can't do better than that. Now, yes, you could always improve. You walk out, you get you got a complete acquittal in 4 days. I got mine in 3. Oh, you son of a, it's like that. It's like, yes, you could get it faster, I guess, but it's a 10 out of 10, baby. It's a win. The last villain says, I thought Kyle needed to testify, made him human for me. Maybe it's because I've been to Wisconsin. Could be. And glad that he is free. That's from the last villain. Patriot Minute says, it has been interesting watching the snowflakes melt in mid-November in Arizona. I surely am glad the jurors as well as the judge stood up and did the right thing. So happy they didn't bow down to the mob that so many others have. Absolutely the right thing in the end. May God watch over Kyle and his family and that he never has to go through anything like this again. By the way, does he get his gun back now? Should have handed it to him when he left the courthouse. I think the judge should have just said, hey, Kyle. And Kyle's walking out of the courtroom like this, and Kyle turns around like out of a Rocky movie. He's like, to judge, and the judge just turns around and says, you forgot something, and throws his AR-15 across the courtroom, and Kyle turns around and says, God, thanks, Judge. Back to justice. And then you get the zoom in, close, and it's the eye of the tiger, something like that. I think that's really how this whole thing should have ended if I had my way about it, but maybe on the next one. Vienticus says, I just got done watching deliberation over jury instructions in McMichael's case. Huge difference in the way the lawyers and the judge proceeded. I got to say I like the prosecutor over the defense as far as style is concerned. Brian's lawyer's funny, old boy pounding the law, the facts, and the table a lot. I thought there were a lot of good arguments back and forth. It's been good and fun to watch. Funniest part was right before lunch today, the prosecutor called out Brian's lawyer by saying he was doing great lawyering. Well, that sounds funny. We've got another one from Sergeant Bob says, veteran cops have PTSD after shooting only one, justified. I cannot imagine what Kyle is going through. 3 Girlies says, my oldest girlie, who is 15, has PTSD. Kyle has PTSD in every form that I have seen on television. It does not surprise me he's not sleeping at night and that he's having panic attacks. Someone without PTSD could have fainted on the back end of those verdicts, but his PTSD intensified those feelings. All the pictures, video only added to the triggers. They were building up to his unbelievable crescendo. You could see the release valve to his PTSD and the pressure just finally take hold over him after all the verdicts were read. His knees buckled underneath him and he caught the seat. It will be a long time of counseling and really getting out of that local area to help him get over the PTSD. He may never be able to walk through Kenosha again without having a panic attack. In reality, he may never be comfortable with firing a gun ever again. It takes intense trauma therapy for most people with PTSD to be functional. He will have to work very hard to come out good functionality in his life and future career. You cannot fake the reaction that he had today, including his hand shaking, hyperventilating, and ultimately breaking down. I totally agree with you. I mean, he looked absolutely, he was shaking, and how can you not? I mean, look, you could feel the energy in your own heart and your own chest. Everybody could, if you're being honest with yourself. Even the people who wanted to see him burn. Leafy Bug says, thanks for your coverage of this trial, Rob. It's been great. A lot of your analysis has been spot on right from the jump. What you said about the judge and the way he managed the process really came home to roost over these last few days, for example. And I think I got a more realistic impression here of what was going through the minds of the jurors than when I watched the highlight reels from Nick's streams, which have been amazing, but I just don't have 9 hours to listen to these. Thanks again for your excellent work. I appreciate your integrity, humility, decency, as well as the laughs you bring to the conversation. Okay, enough butt kissing from me. That's from Leafy Bug. Well, thank you, Leafy Bug. Look, they're doing amazing work over there, but it is a lot, right? It's a full 9 days, and I wish I could spend more time with them, but I also don't have 9 hours. I sort of have to, do my stuff during the day and then go and hang and sort of get caught up on the back end. And so it's been very rewarding for us to have sort of our time together, to have our separate conversations. And I'm grateful that you're here and appreciative of it. D. Delsby says, only upset we won't get to see Krause on the stand talking about the drone video anymore. Certainly be curious to see what happens with that. Speech Unleashed says, if the $2 million is given back to those that raised it, will Kyle end up having to pay his lawyers for the amount of the fees the money his mother raised does not cover? So yeah, I mean, the legal bills are going to be what the legal bills are. I mean, hopefully all of that comes out of the way that I see it. All of that money was raised for Kyle. It's all Kyle's money. That should go to legal fees and then to Kyle. As far as I know, I don't know why anybody else should get any portion of that. Now, if John Pierce comes back and says, oh, my legal bills were $1.95 million, I'd say, no, they weren't. I'd like to see an accounting of that, line by line, the work that you did. And I want to see what you billed for it and how many hours went into that. It's called an accounting of the legal services performed. That should be done in this case, at least relative to the fundraising money. Geomancy Games, he's on YouTube, subscribe, says, hey boss, I must admit I was pretty emotional when I saw him drop to the floor. It's been interesting to see people go insane on Twitter calling it open season on protesters. Still in the hospital, so I have nothing but time to call these dinguses out. Well, you do that, Geomancy, and you rest up well, my friend. I saw the picture of you that you posted over on Locals. You look like you're in good spirits, brother. I appreciate you being here. Thanks for your help in the chat. Rest well. Get better soon. We've got news now, says, third and final comment of the night. Was it weird that the attorneys didn't stand with Kyle during the reading? I know here it is common. Every trial I've seen on camera, they did. It's a great question, news now, and I had the same thought, and I was like, you stand with your client, don't you? But they didn't do that. Corey Chirafisi and Mark Richards didn't stand, only Kyle stood. And so I listened again to the judge, and the judge said, defendant, please rise. And so he sort of was ordering Kyle to stand, not the other two. And so I thought maybe that's just a Wisconsin thing. And so I actually went on YouTube and I thought to myself, what happened in the Derek Chauvin trial? Because we just covered that one. And so I went and looked at it, and I actually looked this up. And in the Derek Chauvin trial, they didn't stand at all. So then I went and I looked at some others, and I found a bunch of other instances where, like I thought, the defense attorney, as I have done, stands with the defendant together. And so I was like, that's weird. Like, we have all these different standards on something that I thought was so obvious. You stand with your client. And so that's how I've done it, stand with your client. In Wisconsin, maybe they don't do it that way. And I've also seen in other places where you don't even stand. Like in the Chauvin trial, both Chauvin and Mr. Nelson were both sitting there. So it's a great question, and apparently there's just a number of different ways to do it. Leafy Bug says, I know you said a lot of prosecutors are like Binger, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how reprehensible would you say Binger's conduct has been compared to what you've seen from other prosecutors, with a 1 not being reprehensible at all and a 10 being outrageously reprehensible? A lot of 1 to 10 questions today. I mean, look, I think that this entire case was outrageous from day one. I've been screaming about it for well over a year. In fact, when we read through the probable cause statement, I said, this is outrageous. Why are they filing this in the first place? So I would say the decision to bring the charges and to drag all of the entire country through this in the beginning is a 10 out of 10. It's outrageous. It is a political prosecution that never should have happened. It was done on the back of an 18-year-old kid, and I'm outraged by it. I'm outraged that it ever came to be in the first place. And I think what you saw in this case was a consistent series of missteps, intentionally done, that crossed at lines. And when you add them all up, you can almost do what they were trying to do with Kyle's case. You can say, look, all of these little things were not by themselves criminal behavior, but when you add them all up and bundle them together, that's what they were trying to do to the jurors to convince them that he was guilty. Here, you can kind of make the same thing. It's not one thing specifically that the prosecution did here that was a level 10 by itself. The drone video is pretty close, but when you add that up, plus everything else, the comments and the attempts to put up different witnesses who were full of garbage on the stage, all of it, it's outrageous. This case never should have been brought, and the prosecutors should be ashamed of themselves, and hopefully somebody looks into it. Vientikis says, all those politicians still trying to gaslight people can go eat some nuts. Captain Jim says, it was certainly interesting to see what Wisconsin does with picking the jury, the whole Tumblr thing, but though this be madness, yet there is a method in it. There is certainly a degree of logic and strange fairness to having the defendant select his own jurors. Wolfgang Deo is here, says, so in Biden's statement, you have that line that says, violence and destruction of property have no place in our democracy. However, while the clarity is nice, it is a bit redundant. Cites us over to the U.S. Constitution and says political violence has no place in the American Republic. Thank you, Wolfgang. Banana Bread says, near the end, the judge said that the charges were dismissed with prejudice. This confused me a little. Was it referring to the motion, or was it because of the not guilty verdict? On Nick's channel this afternoon, they were saying that Binger was wishing he could go back and accept the motion for a mistrial. Yeah, that's probably true, right? Not object to that, but you can't really if he agrees to a motion for a mistrial, then he's sort of justifying that he wants an outcome that's not a verdict. And then that kind of fits into the argument as to why the motion for the mistrial should be granted with prejudice, because maybe they wanted it to be a mistrial. But yes, it was not referring to the motion. It was referring to the verdict. It was Mark Richards, I played the clip, was asking for a judgment on the verdict, and the judge then dismissed the charges. Henry Dixon says, just saying, Gage Grosskreutz has a DUI arrest video on YouTube. Anyone could give it a search if they wanted to. Interesting look into this man who testified as he did. Just saying. For example, if you went to youtube.com and typed in Gage Grosskreutz DUI, you might see something. Just saying. Interesting point there from Henry Dixon. Thank you, Henry. John Halgren says, I did my homework, and I'm actually surprised by the small number of lawyers who have been disciplined. Grueller is not on the list. Whoo! Yeah, and so you went over to the justice.gov website. You can, look, if you really want to check me, you can go to the Arizona Bar website. And the Arizona Bar website also will not have my name on there. This is what John Halgren sent us over at the DOJ. Thanks, John. Thanks for looking into me. Always checking up, as you should be doing. We have Black Cat Meow says, hey, Rob, what are the chances of a civil case being won against Kyle now that he's been acquitted in this criminal case? So it's it's a whole different set of rules. I think that if there was a greater chance that he was convicted or found liable for something, it would happen in a civil case rather than a criminal case. But I'm not a civil lawyer, and so I can't really speak to that. Honestly, I think that also probably low, right? The same jurors are going to see the same evidence, and they're going to come to the same conclusions. This was all nonsense. Hand of Nod says, F yeah. I think you're overreading into Richard's comments on Binger's conduct. I think his point was the DA opening statement was incongruous and with the provocation argument. Is it possible for reforms of judicial and prosecutor practices in the aftermath of this case? Further, can this also be used to wedge open the courts to more public scrutiny? More transparency is broadly better for the republic. The misinformation is still staggering. I noted via Twitter that most of the troublemakers seem to be imported from Milwaukee and Chicago. I guess miscreants split the distance and use Kenosha as a battlefield. Lastly, it's disappointing to see the office of POTUS occupied by an East Coast elitist punching down on a working class family. Checking out Viva and Barnes, curious how graceful Barnes might be. Stay vigilant. Yeah, I haven't checked around with Viva or Barnes or really done anything. I was in back-to-back meetings literally all day, like up until about 3 o'clock, which was very inconvenient. You know, nobody called me and said, hey, Rob, we're about to release the verdict. Is this a good time for you? I would have said, not really, but go ahead. I mean, you know, I guess you can go ahead and release it, but it's a little bit inconvenient for me. I can't live stream right now. So they released it. But yes, hand of nod. Is it possible for reforms on these things? The answer is, of course, yes. The answer is, of course, yes. There is a lot that can be done. It's about the mechanism, about how. You know, can you create independent commissions that have 5 defense lawyers, 5 former judges, 5 former prosecutors, and ask them about new accountability and transparency rules? You could. Might that work? Maybe. But there's a lot to be discussed about that and other reforms. Be Brave says, it's a great day. And that's a good statement. There's no question about that. Midnight Lime says, what's going to happen to the AR? Well, it sounds like it was officially Dominic. So when his case is concluded, we'll get a dispo on that. We'll see if it goes back to Dominic, which of course we'll give it back to Kyle. We have Captain Jim says, I actually agree with the left when they say that a person of color in Kyle's place would have either been capped by police that same night or thrown in jail till the end of time. They probably would have been. However, instead of helping thousands of ordinary people getting screwed by our legal system, they would rather have Kyle join the ranks. Sad. Glad you're doing what you're doing, Rob, and shining that big, beautiful spotlight, baby. From Captain Jim in the house. Good to see you, Captain Jim. We're going to keep on shining it, and I appreciate you being here. Vienticus says, it's always about the narrative. People's skin color isn't the spectrum that people should worry about. Liberal to conservative or left to right is also the spectrum that people should worry about. The spectrum should worry about is the one between cooperative rule and authoritative rule. There's a lot of truth to that, sort of, you know, the oligarchs versus the ruled. Be Brave says, reading that black supremacist article where they capitalize the word black but not white. They do it constantly. It's intentional, and it drives me nuts. I didn't notice that. That's hilarious. 3 Girly says, the rush to judgment is outstanding. And the ones crying, moaning, and groaning afterward would not have been satisfied with any other verdict other than guilty on all charges. I hope Kyle goes after all these horrible people who are calling him a white supremacist and guilty. Can you see the ACLU? They attached his name like stupid idiots. I hope Kyle sues the living out of Biden and all the mainstream media and all their lackeys personally. As much as I hope Kyle does to everybody that has defamed him, I'm not sure it is in his personality. On top of that, it would continue this long living hell for him. It's true. And he's got a whole bright world ahead of him now. And so it's like, do you want to be bogged down in any of that? Maybe. Speech says, given this recent backlash against CRT and the teaching of white guilt and white supremacy, in the recent elections, you would think the Dems would be doubling down on pushing the white supremacy narrative regarding the verdict. What else do they have there, Speech? What else is there? K-Cell says, I have been so emotional all day about this verdict. So happy for Kyle in America. I do appreciate how Judge Schrader said the Constitution prevailed. Me too. Sean O'Halloran says, I have a theory on juror 54, the foreperson and the suspected holdout. I wanted your take on. I'm of the impression that, as many had put it, she is a, quote, Karen. However, I'm starting to think that she wasn't holding out because she was immovable in her position that he was guilty. I just think that she was drunk with power and felt that since she's the foreperson, she's going to go over every little jury instruction and microanalyze it before voting. Thoughts? Could very well be that. It could have been the juror who wanted to take the thing home. And, look, a lot of people are also seeing this as a little slice of history that they get to be a part of. And we saw in the Chauvin case that as soon as the verdict was over, that Brandon Mitchell started hitting the airwaves, right? Going on all the news show, fighting for a cause. He's now a public figure now because he was a part of a historic verdict. And so people, it's like when the cameras are on, you get a little bit more performative when maybe you don't need to be. Maybe there was some of that going on, Sean. Could be onto something there. Rational Gay says, A mostly white Antifa mob is destroying one of the few mostly black areas in Kenosha, and the guy who tries to stop them is racist. Yeah. Tree Mendes says, I want to see Binger and Krause go down for all the BS he did, but if I have a choice between them getting punished and Kyle going free, I will take Kyle's acquittal over Binger being punished every day of the week and twice on Sundays. I completely agree with you. Nancy Pelosi's Fun Bags is here, says, I'm coming to change you, Jerry. I just had a shot of the Rittenhouse Rye Whiskey from Mercado Law, so I have superhuman strength. I'm not sure anybody's going to be able to take care of Nadler. John, I'll be here all week. Halgren says, if it's joke night, what's the difference between Rittenhouse and a COVID vaccination? What's the difference between Rittenhouse and a COVID vaccination? Kyle's shots are effective. But John Halgren, I'll be here all week in the house. We have another one from Monster One says, Richards didn't say no doubt. He was asked if he was confident about how long the jury was taking, and he said no. Doubt. Meaning he was starting the outcome. I'm not sure what that is, but Lavoisier says, Kyle's resume moving forward. Phone number 123456789. The Kenosha Kid at gmail.com. LinkedIn is at linkedin.com/4doorsmorehorrors. Summary of qualifications. Ability to operate under pressure. Effective and fast-paced dynamic environments. Ultimate team player, but also good with independent roles. Finally, sticks to his guns. I'd hire him. Sounds like a good candidate. Like a good employee. Monster One says, when Richards was talking about Binger changing his strategy, he was talking about how Binger started with his opening statements. He started one way, and when he realized he was losing, he magically changed tactics. Yeah, after he got that magical drone footage also. Monster says, our side likes to say, Kyle didn't take the guns across state lines, but he did. And when he was arrested in Illinois, he had the gun. To him, that means he took the gun from Wisconsin to Illinois. I really hope Biden's POS Justice Department doesn't seek charges. Me too. Grouchy old cat lady says, I think a lot of statements from leftist players are nothing more than virtue signaling. Thanks for your level-headed insights. Well, thank you, grouchy old cat lady. Appreciate you being here. Monster One says, am I the only one who knew the verdict was not guilty by the judge's cadence when he told Kyle to stand and accept the verdict? I noticed that. I mentioned that earlier. You could see his face, the pressure drop. Yoda says, Littlefinger has DA aspirations and that requires election. He wants to run for office in the future. Hopefully his exposure here has cut out all possibility of him winning any election. Judge Schrader says, what the heck took 4 days? Jurors getting brazen? Wolfgang says, would be nice if you could point us to resources or places to look that we can see what prosecutors are held to regarding ethics. That way, if we spot bad actions like this in this case, we have a reference point. Maybe it would crowdsource the effort for disbarring bad lawyers. Super easy. I mean, all you have to do is look at, there are ethical rules for lawyers in any state, and they typically have a section on prosecutors. And so the rules are codified. They're defined. Just look them up. Prosecutorial misconduct rules, Wisconsin, and you'll probably find it. But there are rules that are codified. Let's see what else we've got here. Yoda says, suing Gage, make sure that he never has money, which might be a reason to do it. Vientikis says, on your comment on law, I've always thought law to be the pursuit of justice through human interactions and justice to be the pursuit of perfection and outcomes. It's not that we really can attain such things, but we at least can try. Thank you, Vientikis. Prosecutor Krause says, I've gone a day or two eating binge. Poor Krause. Hopefully he's all right. Cove Queen says, I'm just jumping in. Sorry if this has already been addressed. What's the deal with the potential federal prosecution? Also, let's go, Kyle. Good to see you, Cove Queen. So the federal prosecution, Jerry Nadler and his 37-pound diaper, they've recommended that it does be referred over to the Department of Justice for investigation. Biden came out and said, even though I disagree with this, we're going to accept the results of the jury. So, he's really in charge of the Justice Department. Don't know that they're going to do anything about it. I think that the basis would be on a weapons charge, the state line problem. But are they going to do that? Especially when the other evidence is pretty bad. I'm not so sure that they're going to actually move forward with it. So I would say it's probably doubtful at this time. But, you can't put it past this administration. Who knows? Sergeant Bob says, I understand the criminal process, but my hat is off to you for explaining this to our community. You go, Robert. Well, thank you, Sergeant Bob. You know, I'm glad that it came out the way that it did. I was going to be very upset about it if it didn't. And I'm grateful that you're also here, Sergeant, because your opinion matters, because you do know about the law. Lavoisier says, just joking about the resume, though. Seriously, though, watching the verdict read aloud live, when Kyle choked up a little, I got a tear in my eye. So glad justice was served today, and that Kyle will be home just in time for Thanksgiving. Isn't it nice? It's all poetic. It's all just a beautiful, lovely outcome. Nice day. Bumma Lickett says, hi, Rob. Hello, fellow beautiful watchers. I'm happy of the results of not guilty, but why do I feel I should be relieved? Because whoever has seen the evidence will automatically say it's self-defense. I didn't know that the people in charge, like the prosecutor, are so crooked, willing to use all the legal mambo-jumbo to confuse ordinary peasants like me. Ordinary citizens may not have intelligence and the skills to maneuver the law, but we still have morals to distinguish what is good from bad. By the way, can Rittenhouse sue the media for how they characterized him? I think he can. I'm not a defamation lawyer, but I'm sure he's talking to many of them who can tell him whether or not he should be. And it's good to see you, Bumma Lickett. You're right. The media does treat a lot of us like we're dumb moron peasants, and they think of us that way. And they tell us, you have to get the news from us. If you get it from anybody else, you are a problem. But here, we got to bypass them, didn't we? Be Brave says, Black legally owns the guns, and he's still facing charges over it. The gun isn't going anywhere right now, just like those trophies. Jay Markey says, hey, Rob, I loved watching you during the Rittenhouse trial. Your commentary has been top-notch. What's next on the docket to keep us all enthralled? It's a good question there, Jay. What should we talk about next? What do you think? There's a lot of stuff going on. Ghislaine Maxwell, her trial is starting, but we're not going to have any video or audio from her, so we're not going to be able to dive into that. Ahmaud Arbery's wrapping up. Sounds like we had, I'm doing a summary video of Travis McMichael's testimony. I've got some good clips of that. He testified today, and I think today and yesterday and the day before that. Maybe not today. I'm not sure what happened today, but there's the Arbery trial's wrapping up. And then what else is coming down the pike? I don't know. We're going to have to figure out what's next, but certainly I'm open to thoughts, suggestions. If you have comments on how, on where we should pivot to now, I'm open to that. And I look for your thoughts on locals. Nadarb says, I might be typing this too late. No worries if it's late, but as a possible solution to all the corrupt prosecutors, what would you think about giving the jury the power to punish the prosecution if they find that they were corrupt or something like that, where it's out of the hands of the administrative state? It's a good question. And yeah, and so we talk about like civilian boards, where you have civilian boards with other people that make decisions on this. And there's a lot of different ways. I think one of the main ways to do this is to stop over criminalizing everything and come up with different alternatives so that prosecutors don't have to go out and try to kill each other over convictions. If we stop trying to penalize everybody and try to help people, maybe you wouldn't have prosecutors acting like Thomas Binger because the incentives are so perverse. Ice Wolf says, glad he's innocent. Sorry, not been there. Been here. Have a good Thanksgiving. Please pray for my dad in surgery earlier. Prayers for Ice Wolf's dad. Hopefully he's doing well. Hope the surgery went well. All of our thoughts are with him. Sergeant Bob says, Kyle, come on down to Arizona. Good place to be. Jay Heath says, vindication. Glad to see the outcome today. I was in tears when the verdict was being read. Hope this continues to awaken America. This is exactly why you started this channel. You're right about that, Jay Heath. Have a great weekend, Rob. You too, Jay Heath. Thanks for chiming in on that. Thunder7 says, Kyle wanted to be a firefighter. He was a cadet in the program. Does this acquittal affect his career choices? Like, could he be a cop or a firefighter if he wanted? Yeah, he's not a criminal. He's not been convicted of anything. He's been charged, but he was acquitted of all charges. So he's as innocent and free as legally can be. Now, he has a charge, and so people are going to see that. They're also going to know about it. So, that might hurt him because they don't want to be associated with him for that reason. But legally, yeah, he's innocent. News Now says, okay, I lied. One more comment. Just now on Court TV, Richard is being interviewed again. He said he wanted nothing to do with the case at first because he believed the media. Wow, that's crazy. That's crazy. Wolfgang says, while PTSD may be a good thing to discuss, I don't particularly feel it is convincing to talk about. Yeah, it's traumatic, sure, but not at the levels of what it seemed to be 2 decades ago. Says that Kyle did a pretty good job regarding everything going on. Sucks it's going on. But I don't trust psychologists. They overdiagnose everything. From Wolfgang. R. Servey says, as I mentioned on YouTube chat, Kyle will be on Tucker on Monday. Here is the trailer for the interview. It has behind the scenes from today and after the verdict. You should watch it on the stream. This is huge. Oh, and hi from Ireland. We have no rights. Ha ha. Well, that's horrible. Hi from Ireland, where we have no rights. Ha 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 ha. That's not funny, but it is funny. It's also terrible, but not funny. All right.
It's just stuff they...
Ooh, that's loud. All right, let's turn that down a little bit. We got Tucker Carlson original. They're doing a Rittenhouse. Let's watch this. A little Friday night trailer from Tucker.
Keeps you up at night. Like, once you finally do get to sleep, your dreams are about what happened and you're waking up in a dark, cold sweat.
Yeah. You had dreams about what happened?
Every single night. It's quite scary, actually, because the dreams feel so real, and they're not the same at all. They're all different. They're the different scenarios that run through your head during the day, like what could have happened. Like, I'm alive, but what could have happened? Like, what if I wasn't alive, or what if I did let Mr. Rosenbaum steal my gun? It's those type of dreams of the outcome of... It's bad, but almost every outcome is either me getting seriously injured or hurt or dead. Those are just the dreams I have on a daily basis.
The defendant will rise and face the jury and hearken to its verdicts.
State of Wisconsin versus Kyle Rittenhouse. As to the first count of the information, Joseph Rosenbaum. We, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the second count of the information, Richard McGinnis. We, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
How do you feel, man?
The jury reached the correct verdict. Self-defense is not illegal. And I believe they came to the correct verdict, and I'm glad that everything went well. And it's been a rough journey, but we made it through it. We made it through the hard part.
Whoa! Woo! Wow, I'm glad that was recommended that we watch that, because we actually got to hear a little bit of Kyle Rittenhouse after the verdict today. My goodness. So thank you to R. Servey for that. So that's going to be happening on Monday. So I guess the show on Monday is going to be after that is. So we'll have to watch that, and then we'll have a breakdown of that as well. But my goodness, Kyle Rittenhouse was out and spoke to Tucker Carlson, and it's a pretty wild thing. Binger is here, says that he lost. We have another one from Marty Lund, says, Kyle's mixed race Hispanic. Kyle saved an Indian woman's business from arson. From this, a majority white mob targets him with violence. Kyle shoots 3 white serial criminals. So Twitter, Big Tech, MSM, and DNC declares white supremacy. Dang, I didn't know it was Tuesday again. That's from Marty Lund. It's like, yeah, none of the facts matter. It's white supremacy. It's nonsense. Captain Jim says, Rob, if I may, a studio design suggestion. Instead of a big, beautiful blue mountains behind you, you should put a world map with the pins on the countries you have fans from and a tally sheet of Mr. Nadler's diaper weight. So you sort of have like a running whiteboard of his weight. 37.5 pounds. Days without a Jerry Nadler diaper change. 1,247. And I just come in every day. It has been 1,248 days since somebody changed Jerry Nadler's diaper. It's not bad. It's not a bad idea. Yeah, I like it. I think those are pretty good, Captain Jim. Okay, back over on YouTube. We had a couple coming in. Behind the scenes, we had Tara Raynar. We had that one. Yeah, Tucker Carlson's interviewing Kyle. Tim Stalling says, I ain't gay, but I love you. I'm not gay either, but I love you right back, my friend. There's no doubt about that. Today's a good day. I love everybody today. Gay or not. I just burgeoning with love. Tara Rayner says, how likely is it that Binger gave Zeminski a dismissal with the antics with Nathan DeBruin? One of those heroes in the case. I don't think that he gave him a dismissal. I think that's actually still being prosecuted, but I don't know what happened with that, because there's probably all sorts of, sort of behind the scene conversations about the privilege against testifying and all sorts of stuff there. So Jacob says, I donated to Kyle's legal defense and bail fund. Anything left over should go to Kyle. I agree with you completely. Is money raised for him. And Wolfgang says, would be nice to peek at the Charlottesville trials. Okay, it's a good recommendation. So I'll write that one down. Charlottesville trials. I don't know what those are. Charlottesville trials. And then, thank you, Wolfgang, for that suggestion. And then we have Bernard Samuels says, Wisconsin has charged many other 16 and 17-year-olds with weapons possessions. Does this open up all those other cases? No, I mean, so each case would have to be reviewed individually. Like here, they talked about whatever justifications were for dismissing that charge and the gun charge, but that wouldn't automatically go over to those 16 and 17. There'd be different gun charges, different ages, different locations, different justifications. So you're not going to have a good time taking this case and making it binding precedent for any other criminal case. It's just it's isolated to Kyle Rittenhouse. The reason why it's important is because it is persuasive in the public zeitgeist about how we think about self-defense cases. That's why I think it's so important, why it matters. And that, my friends, is it for us over from our friends at watchingthewatchers.locals.com and on YouTube. And I want to take a quick moment to thank everybody who is supporting us over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, because we had a lot of new people sign up recently. And I want to just say thank you for all of your support. It really means the world to me. And we have in the house, we've got Red Beard, we've got Monique Nicole, we've got Doctor here, we've got Facebook Law 101, we've got Hobo Jim, Mombino, we've got West Virginia, Ridge Rider 68, Mayhem Studios, Ben Tomlinson, Laurel 720. We've got Unsheathed, Tucker Greb, Tommy Nukes, Phantasmagloria, Black Cat Meow, Nick McLeod, Dr. Brenton's here, T. Blakemore, Patriot Minute, Chris C., Dr. Sammy D., Pub Crawl, Julie, Fluffles, Woods 08, Karaoke Princess is here. We also have Not the Great, Cora Coco, Overton, Transparency, Miss Sinlin. We've got Desert Pirate, BJR, J-Bot, DC Jen, David Orndorff, Drew Johan, Nice T, Miles Breeden, Time Lord Stu, Tester 22T, OG Raw. We've got Coronis Adair, The Next Unicorn, Jack Solier, The Next Unicorn again, The Official Glitch, Da Biff, Custodes, PNEW. We've got Robert Emery and Chip Von Shoulder all over at our watchingthewatchers.locals.com community. And we're tremendously grateful that you came and joined us over there. We do live streams several times throughout the week in the mornings when I have time, trying to do more of those. Oftentimes, my brother Joey often will show up and say hello. He did this past week on Thursday. You can get a free copy, a PDF of my book, Beginning to Winning. The real reason to join is so that you can connect with other people in a community, so that when days like today happen, when there is a verdict that helps all of us reconnect with our faith in the justice system, we can celebrate it together. We can have communities like this, live streams, where we can open up the chat, give each other digital virtual high fives, and come back all again and do it tomorrow, the next week, and the time after that. That's what's happening over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. I hope you check it out and come join us. And that, my friends, is it for me for the day. One final congratulations to Kyle Rittenhouse, to the Kyle Rittenhouse team, to everybody involved in the case, to all of you for continuing to watch this case and support the cause, to speak out about the injustices that we saw. It's been a great day. Oftentimes, we don't have good news on this show because we're talking a lot about the downfalls that we see around us in society. But this is a day we can pause, take a deep breath, breathe a little bit of that air of freedom and justice, and be happy in celebration and enjoy it. So enjoy it, my friends. I know I will. It's going to be a nice weekend with a breath of fresh air. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you unplug from politics, spend some time with friends and family, pay attention to the things that matter, and that is not our federal government in politics. It's the people that we love and care about most. So spend some time with them. Enjoy yourselves, my friend. We're going to be back here, same place, same time on Monday. And we may do some stuff this weekend on Locals and elsewhere. So stick around, my friends. Have a tremendous rest of your Friday. Be well. And I will see you on the next one. Here it is. Everybody, take care. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.